All right, welcome back to the Outlet Podcast. I'm Gabe.
And I'm Eric.
We were doing the podcast right before we started, and we thought, we should probably just hit record.
Just turn on the podcast. Yeah.
So Brett Weinstein. Right?
Brett
so
Weinstein had a podcast.
So Brett Weinstein did a Joe Rogan Experience podcast. He's an evolutionary biologist, pretty smart guy. And one thing that he talked about on the podcast that I thought was kind of interesting was the fact that these George Floyd riots are not going to end.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no end to these George Floyd riots because people are so pissed off and people are so fed up that it's just going to continue. And people aren't going to get bored.
Yeah.
They're still going to fight for, what they want to fight for. And he said it's going to later develop to be something that is so big and so challenging to the American system that he doesn't know what's going to happen next. I don't know.
I think that's a pretty common sentiment, right? That a lot of people feel like, everything is just kind of up in the air right now, and that, even though we all don't know what America is going to look like once we come out of this, we all know that it's not going to look the same, right? Regardless of whether it's, another 4 years of Trump or whether it's, the complete collapse of the American government as we know it, it's going to change, right? And I don't know, like what were you were talking about how he thought that American culture had sort of died away, and I feel like that's sort of a broad sentiment that is held by many figures on the right. Is that by embracing all of these social causes, we're sort of abandoning our heritage, and traditionalism more generally is often like a banner of right-wing conservatives that say, listen, we need to uphold this and we need to stop changing this.
I mean, when you say American culture, I mean, you correct me a little bit earlier before we started. When you say American culture, it doesn't really mean one specific thing, because American culture is so diverse. Like, American culture is built off of many other people's cultures coming together. And I guess what he meant by American culture is that we have this system that we've built, which you could say was, the Constitution that we wrote and all the Bill of Rights that we've added to it. That's, are things that we should believe and that we should have in our society. I guess that's what he meant by American culture. But also American culture, you could say, is this kind of laissez-faire capitalism that comes up every once in a while and then dies down, and then comes up once in a while and then dies down. And this economic system that we have as well. I know those kind of seem not related, but of course the economics affect the way people act.
Yeah. I mean, I would to say that, like, we have strayed from our original economic system, on the one is true. I mean, our economy does not resemble the economy of the 13 colonies, right? However, to say that we've changed our economic system, I don't think is true. And I think that's really what a lot of these people are fighting for, is to change our economic system. And I think that, ultimately, in the sort of ideological duel between Jefferson and Hamilton when our nation was being founded, Hamilton stuck up for sort of English-style industrial capitalism, with democracy to appease people, but ultimately have enough loopholes within that democracy to allow industrial capitalists to ultimately pull the strings, right? Yeah. Because that's what he saw in Britain, and he predicted that if America was able to industrialize as quickly as Britain, it would become a wealthy global power. However, he conveniently ignored all of the people whose rights and whose say in government would be sidelined in that process. Jefferson believed in, human democracy, with lots of individual farmers, supporting themselves, right? Ultimately, Hamilton won that ideological duel, and that really has been the ideological backing for our economic system ever since the founding of our country. And I don't think that has changed, right?
It hasn't.
You can talk about how many times
it's gone away and come back. That's true.
I mean, I think that like ultimately we've come back to the same root ideas, and the thing about capitalism is that it's innovative, and it's not at all as attached to tradition and traditional ideas as a lot of conservatives think that it is, right? Capitalism is totally fine with letting gay people get married and accepting trans rights, because guess what? At the end of the day, it doesn't hurt their profit margins, and that's why you see Coca-Cola and IBM and Dell Computers switching their logo on Twitter to a rainbow flag during Pride Month. That doesn't affect them at all. In fact, it might just help their bottom line, because some people might see them in a more positive light, might choose to buy their products, and that's ultimately why they're doing that, right? So even though our society can shift and our culture can shift and our perspective can shift, especially on the issues that we're really grappling with as a nation right now about race. Even though those perspectives can shift, capitalism and sort of the industrial capture of the state has been the status quo throughout American history, and I think that it's evolved, it's advanced, but it's ultimately remained the foundation of the American economy.
Yeah. Okay, I want to get into kind of a heated
ahead.
question, right?
Ahead,
so we talked about this on a previous podcast, and I'm still a little bit confused to what it actually means. The eighth that I'm referring to is defunding the police, right? Because that's, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of like the goal of the whole Black Lives Matter, whatever, is that we should defund the police because they're hurting African American communities.
Yeah, well, I think that it's a lot more nuanced than that, right? And before getting into that specific question, I'll say that it's kind of impossible to sum up the whole movement, right? Because it is, a variety of different voices that want a variety of different things. I try to stop myself, even though I do end up saying it. I try to stop myself from saying, like, this is what this whole movement is for, and this is what this movement is fighting for. So I just want to preface it with that, is saying that, like, some people might be holding up those signs that say defund the police, and that's what some of the organizers might choose to put on the banner. But there are definitely some people that are more radical than that. There are definitely people that are less radical than that. So I'm not commenting on necessarily how much of the movement that wants that, and whether or not that is the main thing that the movement wants, right? Because ultimately no one person can decide either of those answers.
And that's another part that I wanted to talk about also, is that the movement seems sort of leaderless. Not that there aren't the heads of the Black Lives Matter organization,
right?
But when it comes to specific protest, it seems that everyone is not looking up to a leader.
Exactly.
Right? It's a leaderless cause. Right? And when you have a lack of leadership, you don't have people who will go to the, government buildings and try and pass legislation, because they don't have a leader. They can't all do that. So it seems that because they don't have a leader of the Black Lives movement, it isn't effective for them to pass legislation at all.
Yeah. Well, I think that we'll get back to defunding the police. I'll answer this one first, right? I think that ultimately what we're seeing here is not an exercise of like political power or people wanting to take political power. Although you could characterize it as that. Ultimately, I think that what we're seeing is a failure in the relationship between people that live in a country and their representatives. Because ultimately, the way that relationship is supposed to work, in my perspective, is that the representatives are supposed to meet the goals, the wants, and the needs of the people that they're representing. And if those people are demanding something, if they're standing up and if they're going in the streets and they're shouting for that change, then it's the job of the representatives to give them that change. And that's ultimately how that relationship should work. It's not the job of the people to come up with that change, to write that change, to legislate that change themselves, because ultimately that's what representatives are there for, right? The same way that cashiers are there to ring up your food and give you a receipt. That's their job. And right now, we don't need, the Black Lives Matter movement to come up with candidates to run for office to pass legislation. That's not what we're here for. We're here to make our voices heard, and we're here to make sure that they live up to their end of the bargain. We're here, we pay our taxes, we vote for them, and yet they're not living up to their end of the bargain. They're not giving us what we want, and they're our representatives. That's the way it should work, is that they represent us. And if half the population stands up and says, we want this change, then half the representatives should be fighting for that change. And we're not seeing that happen. Yeah. So ultimately, I don't think the fact that the movement is more leaderless than other movements. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that that's really exemplary of the fact that this is a grassroots movement. It's not the fact. It's not an established organization like the NRA or the Republican Party or the Democratic Party that's organizing this. This is the anger and the emotional fire that is rising up from young people in America, and we don't need to have Martin Luther King's or Malcolm X's to lead us. All we want is to have our voices heard, and that's what we're doing in these streets. Although having a Malcolm X or a MLK right now
might be more efficacious.
Would be awesome. It'd be
Sure.
awesome.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of people like them. Like I've been watching a lot of the Portland live streams, and there are speeches that go on every night where people bring speakers and microphones and they talk to the crowd and they try to promote their message. And some people are really radical. Some people are talking about abolishing colonialism and how the American empire is an imperialist state, even here in America, and how all people of color are oppressed people of this imperial state, right? And then you have other people that are talking about, hey, you white people need to stop throwing bottles at these cops because that makes people of color look bad, and ultimately communities of color are the ones that bear the consequences of your actions, right? Those are drastically different views with drastically different, underlying perspectives. Yet the movement has the room and everybody has the space to share their voice and make their voice heard and try to bring others onto their side. And I think that's what a lot of people from the outside looking in don't understand is that, listen, if you're tentatively on board with Black Lives Matter and you just have problems with some of the phrasing, some of the chants, something like that, you can still go to a protest. You can talk to people. You can try to convince people of your point of view, right? Even if you don't agree with 100% of what everybody in the movement is saying, you can still be a part of the movement. There's space for everybody.
Yeah. So
I forgot what you were saying, and I kind of just got on a little rant.
No. I like the rant. Keeps it interesting.
Yeah.
What was I gonna? I was gonna follow that.
We're talking about defunding police.
Sure. So my whole perspective is this: that it isn't. It is, of course, people, right? The police, people who are doing bad things to African American communities. But I think if I go a little bit deeper, I think it's more economic. I think the real problem with African Americans and the police is more economic, because when you have African American communities, let's just talk about ourselves. So, because we have a certain zip code, we're pretty much guaranteed a job, pretty much guaranteed good opportunities, maybe a house and
because
a wife.
We live in this wealthy
because we
community,
live in this wealthy, affluent community.
Not guaranteed, but we have an advantage.
We have a massive
over
advantage.
People that live in less.
Sure, as long as we work hard,
Yeah.
we're all connected. We have good connections with everyone else. If I wanted a job at my dad's business, I'm sure he would give it to me, and I could make money that way. There's a lot of opportunities.
Sure I could talk to Chase O'Farrell, Tal O'Farrell, and get hooked up at the Swim and Racket Club. We have plenty of opportunities.
We have tons of opportunities just because we have a certain zip code and we know people, and that's an economic advantage. Now, if you're looking at African American communities, they don't have that. They don't have that economic advantage.
A lot of let's not.
Oh, I'm not.
generalize
Sorry.
here. Right.
Many African American communities. Many African American communities, inner city communities, right? That have project housing and single motherhood and all this stuff, right? They are at a disadvantage economically. I think that's the real underpinning to this, is that they're seeing this economic disadvantage. They see that white people in our zip code have pretty guaranteed jobs lined up ahead of them and a pretty successful path, and they don't, and they see that as unfair, and it is unfair, right? And I think the reason why we're seeing all these fired up people is because they are recognizing their disadvantage, and they're seeing it as unfair, and it is unfair.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll say that it's not just black people rising up, right? That there's pretty much everybody, right? In terms of young people, about half the people I know are regularly attending these protests and willingly joining this movement, right? Even if they're not black. But I think that to try to focus in and try to identify one specific factor that is the cause of systemic racism in America, or try to identify the factor that is the reason that black people experience police brutality at a higher rate than other communities, I think that it's going to be hard, right? And I think that you can identify individual factors that may play a part in that story. But I think that ultimately, because America has such a long history of racism, and it's a really complex history as well, and because race was such a big thing in our society, right? Just in terms of almost every aspect of society, it was prevalent, and because of that, there's a million different factors that all lead to those problems that we're talking about, right? Like, environmental racism, the fact that communities of color traditionally have had less social and political clout has meant that they have traditionally been subject to more environmental pollution, because if a city is building a power plant and choosing between a more impoverished community of color and a wealthier affluent white community, that affluent white community will generally have more political power and be able to lobby the city to put the power plant or whatever it be, chemical plant, in the other neighborhood. So and once you multiply that across 200 years in all the cities in America, now all of a sudden black people have higher rates of asthma as a whole than white people in the whole nation, right? And that's just one of those many factors that stacks up to build this tower of systemic racism in America. So I think that that's like kind of the underlying argument that I feel like a lot of people on the right fail to grasp, is that you can't point out the one thing that's systemic racism in America. Like Ben Shapiro, for example, is it makes me cringe. He's like sorry, I'm getting flustered here. He says all the time that systemic racism just doesn't exist in America. And when asked, he's like, well, point it out to me. Like, where is it? Like, where is the systemic racism, right? And the interviewer or the person talking to him is often like, well, I mean, like, and is often pretty flustered because, well, there's so many different examples of systemic racism, and systemic racism happens in such a variety of different ways in America that it's impossible to identify one factor and cut it out and be done with it, right? We've tried to target individual things, and we've eliminated almost all of the legal barriers that have traditionally been there, right? Like Harvard isn't allowed to not enroll a student because they're Asian or because they're Latino, right? But there are still so many factors out there that are still not solved, that are still prevalent, right? Like environmental racism, like the school to prison pipeline, right? Putting police officers in schools is provides a let me figure out how to explain this. I won't explain it. Do you understand the point generally, right?
Yeah, no, I get the
I'll
point.
just keep talking on and on.
Your point is that there's so many factors.
There's so many factors, and it's impossible to narrow down, and yeah, we got to attack all the factors, right? I mean, I think that's the obvious next step, right? Is that if you understand that it's not just one thing, or it's not just 10 things that is the cause of these massive problems that we see, you really start to understand, like, wow, we do need radical change, because it's not just passing one law or adding one amendment to the Constitution. It's like really taking a hard look at every single part of American society and reevaluating it and trying to eliminate how it contributes to systemic racism in America. Does that make sense, right? Like, so
yeah.
Does that kind of?
I don't know. It seems like an impossible task, though, because
I mean, it's like trying to say we're gonna make a perfect Christian society. It's never gonna happen. You're never gonna get people not to sin. But does that mean that we shouldn't do it?
No.
And you, as a good Catholic, should be fighting for that every day. And it's the same thing for me, that I believe that we can have a better America, and it's my duty as an American to fight for a better America.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going on. Right?
yeah.
So, talking a little bit more about that, the economic factor. I mean, you're right in pointing out that it's not just economics.
Yeah, and like they're all intertwined too, right? That like just being poorer leads to all these other consequences. So if black people are poorer to start with, then they're hit with all the other consequences of being poor in America, which is a whole other long list of consequences, right? Yeah. So I don't know. I'm tentative and cautious to try to like point out and identify and like
one thing.
Yeah, one thing or even a group of things, because it is just so complicated, and people have dedicated their whole lives and written theses on this topic and still not been able to like sum it up completely.
So let's get back onto the defund the police, right? Because there are it seems like to me there's a substantial amount of people who are protesting who are advocating for defunding the police. And I don't know, do you think that defunding the police is a pretty good step forward? Do you think it's the right, thing to fight for in these protests?
Yeah, I mean,
because if I can put my part in here real quick, it seems like defunding the police is kind of a bad idea. And the classic right argument would be, well, who's going to show up when someone breaks into my house? Right. But I think it's a little, I think the second part to that is, well, who's going to stop large amounts of crime from arising? Because I heard that an area that defunded their police, or at least removed their police, there was a record amount of homicides within the week.
Which area?
I think it was somewhere in Washington.
Okay.
I don't remember the exact place, but when they removed the police, there was a record amount of homicides within the week. And I think if defunding the police means there's going to be more crime, then that's not efficacious even for African Americans.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that, first of all, we don't know what that's going to look like, right? It's a 3-word phrase. There's no legislative component. There's no quantitative, concrete proposal within that phrase, right? So, it's easy to, point out one city that fired all 3 of its 4 police officers, and 3 people got killed in the city, and it's like, yeah, that was the first time 3 people got killed in a week ever in this town of 2,000 people. Sure, and that's just straw manning your example, right? Because you didn't give any actual numbers, so I have the freedom to do that, right?
You do have the freedom to do that. Although I think, I wish I could pull it up. I wish we had Jamie.
Yeah, I wish we had Jamie here to pull it up. But yeah, I mean, it could be something like that, right? But defunding the police, there's a variety of different options that follow that initial drive, right? And to sort of combat your example, I didn't read the article, but I saw an article headline that said that detailed about how a Kentucky town replaced 2 of its police officers with social workers. And had those social workers respond to nonviolent calls. So calls like domestic disputes, drug overdoses, people freaking out in the street, the kind of things that you don't need cops with guns for, right? Generally. However, they had a partner that was a cop, right? So it would be, a portly middle-aged woman that would show up with a police officer behind her. But ultimately, she was in charge. And they observed a massive decrease in arrest rate, right? Because and they also found a massive decrease in repeat offenders, right? So people that would get caught again and again and again for the same crimes, like domestic violence or domestic disputes, or public intoxication, or disturbing the peace, things like that, where in reality you don't need a cop to throw someone on the ground, throw cuffs on him, and throw him in a cell for 3 months. That's not going to solve that problem. Instead, they chose to correctly address the problem by having social workers do those jobs. Because guess what? A person that's freaking out in the street shirtless on drugs doesn't need to get thrown in a jail cell. They need real constructive help from someone who has the ability to help them. And cops with guns don't have that ability. So I think that, once again, when we're talking about a hypothetical proposal that hasn't been implemented, even at a state level anywhere, I think that it's important to be cautious about tying it down to concrete examples of, like, this is what it would look like. It would be 50% of the budget gone. It would be 20% of the budget gone. It would mean putting into housing, putting into homelessness. Nobody really knows, and anyone that's trying to concretely tie it down is either trying to promote their own agenda or trying to discredit a specific person's agenda. So,
okay, yeah, that's
so
fine.
I think that generally. I think it's a good driving force, right? It's a good theory, right? And in implementing that theory, we're definitely going to fail. And there are going to be cities that do it incorrectly. And there will be negative consequences in that process. But we can't improve our society without taking that risk, right? We can't experiment and see what would defunding the police look like without anticipating some negative consequences. Now I'm not saying, yeah, let's have the NYPD completely disband and just let New York be free, right? Obviously, it's up to the people of New York for how they want to do it. And it's the same with every other city. If the people of Detroit say, listen, we want you to get rid of, your armored vehicles, and that's it. Just sell the armored vehicles and hire Social Security workers, right? Like, that right there, that might be what they want, and it could lead to an improvement, right? Another city might say, listen, we want you to lay off 20% of the officers and instead take that money and build public housing, right? Every city is going to do something different, and ultimately, once we do that process of experimentation, we're going to see what the best solution was. And it's going to be different for every city, right? There's not going to be a blueprint for what's the best way to defund police and what's the best way not to do it. Yeah. I mean, does that make sense?
That does
right?
make sense. And
like it's not one concrete proposal. It's not a bill in Congress. It's just a general theory that a lot of people think could be built upon. You know, that we can work on doing that.
Yeah.
And it might help.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah. I don't know. It seems like to me though that you're going to have to start making concrete proposals soon.
Once again, it's not our job. That's not our job. You know, I'm 19 years old. I didn't choose to get elected to be a representative. I didn't sign up. Nobody voted me into power. And I know that nobody else at the protest is in that position of power
so
either.
What party is representing you guys?
It's not about parties, Gabe. It's about the fundamental relationship of citizens and their representatives, right? No matter if it's a Democrat or a Republican or a Libertarian or a Green Party person that's representing you, no matter what, if they're representative, their job is to represent you. And if 80% of the people in a certain city or a certain county or a certain state want something, then they're failing if they're not doing that, right?
Sure.
They are letting down their end of the bargain if they're not meeting the needs, the wants, and the desires of the people they represent. So it's not our job to come up with legislation.
It's
not
not your job.
our job.
But okay,
right?
but
it's
what
their
representative?
job. It's our job to let them know what we want. That's why we're out there. That's why we're in front of the police station. That's why we're in front of these courthouses, is letting them know as blatantly as possible. That's why we use signs that say, you know, fuck cops, disband the SDPD, right? We want to be as blatant as possible. And if they're not picking up that message that we're saying so clearly, and we have been for 60 days now, that they're failing. You know, it's not our responsibility anymore.
Okay,
the ball's in their court.
What representative? How are you going to make it in the interest of those representatives to actually represent you guys? Because it isn't in the interest of those representatives.
All right, now we're getting back to the fundamental flaws in American democracy, right?
Yes, exactly. So yeah. Okay. Fair enough. These protests.
That's why we got to have a socialist revolution, man. Like, you're finally getting it, right? That we can't have real change until we have real democracy, right?
That's the radical Eric.
Yeah.
Look. It's not in the interest of any representative to represent you guys because they don't gain anything from it. So okay. So
I mean, you're
thinking
thinking in the constraints of like traditional American democracy. Like the longer this goes on, the more radical it will become. Like before you know it, it will no longer be the you will get potential benefits if you give us our demands. Before you know it, it will be you will suffer consequences if you don't meet our demands. Right. That's the way that goes.
That's how it develops.
Initially, we're offering carrots, and before you know it, they're getting sticks. Right.
Yeah. So it seems like the Democratic Party isn't siding with you guys.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean,
because
Joe Biden said, "Yeah, I'll say it. Antifa are terrorists." Like, what? Joe Biden? You can't call American citizens terrorists, right? And they're not like they're peacefully protesting in the streets, and it's not even an organization. Joe Biden.
Fuck
Joe Biden, man.
Yeah, if you ain't black if you don't vote Joe Biden. But it doesn't seem like the Democratic Party or the Republican Party wants to represent anything that the Black Lives Matter movement is actually doing, because it's not in their interest. Because the Democratic Party has been in bed with big business, right? And big business, it doesn't help big business to side with Black Lives Matter.
Well, it doesn't help them to enact real change, right? Like
yeah,
they will wear,
they'll wear Black Lives Matter,
and they'll Twitter will change its logo to a blackbird, right?
Sure.
And Johnson & Johnson will come out with a special line of shampoo that supports Black Lives Matter, but like ultimately
that's so they make money, by the way.
Exactly. Like
it's not because they care about Black lives.
Of course not, because ultimately they're corporations, man. And
they care about money.
They care about money. And because the Democratic Party and our democracy as a whole is captured by them, the goals of these companies are ultimately the goals of our representatives, right? So yeah, ultimately, like, our democracy is not equipped to provide the changes that we want to see.
Yeah, and I think it would be in the interest of the Democratic National, the DNC to actually side with Black Lives Matter because there's so many people who are, who would potential voters really.
Like it's easy to say side with Black Lives Matter, right? But then once you start to think about what that entails,
it entails radical change.
And first of all, Democrats don't have the power to make any radical change. They just have the House, right? And the House needs the Senate and ultimately the White House too in order to get some real change. So if it was Obama in 2008 to 2012, or 2010, we'd be fine, right? But we're not right now. So the Democrats don't even have enough power to like really do anything.
Sure, they don't have they don't have the Supreme Court either. Really,
let's think about the consequences of if they did commit to some serious radical change. Like let's say nationalizing bail funds, right? Just saying no more private bail companies because bail companies explicitly take advantage of the most pushed down
insane interest rates.
Yeah, for people that are already in jail and have no money. I mean, like
and have no job.
And have no job. Like it's just fucked. Like I hate bail companies.
Have you heard about payday loans as well?
Yeah, I hate them all, man. Nationalize all of them, right? And that's what the Democratic Party said, right? And they said, listen, we're gonna release all of the nonviolent, low-level drug criminals, right? Like if you're in jail for a 10 sack right now, you're out, right? Now all of a sudden, the Democratic Party has proposed radical changes, right? Now all of a sudden, think about this from the perspective of the business community, right? You're a large Democratic donor. Let's say you're Pfizer, right? You donate a couple $1 million every year to your state Democratic Party and to the National Democratic Party, and that's to ensure that there's stable governance, that you can have your guy at the FDA make sure that everything runs smoothly. Now all of a sudden the Democrats are starting to shake up the waters, right? They're starting to rock the boat in terms of letting people out of jail and nationalizing private industry. Like, what do you think they're gonna think? Like as a private donor, right? You're like, the CFO that's about to send out this check.
I'm going to retract my donations.
And you might say, listen, I mean, I guess the Democratic Party has switched sides, and now all of a sudden they're the side of the people. We're going to go with the Republicans, right? Now all of a sudden they have our check for November, right? So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense why the Democrats aren't saying that if elected in November they will do all of these good radical things. And I mean, it's understandable why they're not. And once again, it doesn't come back to the fact that Nancy Pelosi is a demon or Chuck Schumer is, Satan on earth. Like, it's just because that's the way it's structured, and they wouldn't be in that position if they didn't play the game. And that's the way the game works. And so
it all comes back to money.
It all comes back to that it's not democracy, right? And
sure.
How we really do need democracy in our society, right? Like, sure, money is important and all that, but if we change the way our society works, we can decrease the importance of money. You know what I mean? And it comes back to what are the mechanisms that power our society? How do we interact with each other? How do we hold the people in charge of us responsible?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, politicians say, what's in it for me and not what's the best for the people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that really comes back to where are our incentives?
Mm-hmm.
How are we incentivizing these people to vote, or not vote, but how are we incentivizing our representatives?
Mm-hmm.
Is it based off money?
Mm-hmm.
Well, right now,
Mm-hmm.
most of it is.
Mm-hmm.
Should it be based off money? No, it should be based off of how can I do the most good for the most amount of people?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this, and I think that the idea that direct corruption and direct bribery is sort of the root cause of American corruption is sort of blind to the fact that we've evolved a little bit past that, right? Like if we lived in Zaire,
sure,
or it's not the Congo. I've been watching old movies. If we lived in the Congo, our politicians would take direct bribes from foreign companies. Like they would get a suitcase full of dollar bills, right, and then that would get sent to their hotel room, right? But in America, it's a little bit more discreet than that, because Elon Musk can't just send a state representative a duffel bag full of cash, right? That's against the FCC's rules. So instead, it's not that politicians are directly gaining monetary benefit from pleasing these donors. It's that the politicians are ultimately ruled by the DNC or the RNC, right? And they set the goals and they set the incentives, and those goals and those incentives are ultimately set by those donors. So there's a layer of separation in between the donors and the direct representatives. Now, do some politicians have direct relationships with donors? Yeah, of course. And I'm sure that plenty of lobbyists speak directly to representatives. However, it's not necessarily that they are getting checks and, they're going out and buying yachts with their, bribe from Monsanto. It's more that that's the way up the political ladder for more power, right?
Yes.
Like if you piss off your boss, the DNC or the RNC, because you pissed off their boss, you're fucked. And that's the game you have to play, is about just not making these various groups of people mad, like not having a scandal, so that you get reelected, right? Making sure that all the big donors in your district are happy enough, and making sure that the donors at the national level are happy enough. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not like they're
a little
getting
bit more
a briefcase.
cloudy. Yeah, it's a little
full
bit
of
more.
cash.
It's a little
There's,
vague. I don't
like
know.
you said, a layer of separation,
Yeah.
but it ultimately does come back to money, I think.
I mean, yeah, money's fueling the thing, but what I'm saying is that it's not that the politicians are receiving money. Like ultimately, if you please Monsanto, like sure you might get a kickback if you're like kind of a dumb politician, but if you're good and you're smart, you receive no extra money. You just receive your congressional salary, but instead you turn that into political capital. And so next time you need help, they help you, right? And that's the way you move up the chain. It's not by buying and selling things like you're at a market. It's by buying and selling this political capital that is ultimately bought originally with money. Right, so money's the entrance into the game, but once you're into the game with that political capital, you can do what you want with it. And the good politicians don't cash out early, right?
Because
you save it up
you
until you get
move up the ladder.
You get up to the Clinton level, and then you got the Clinton Foundation. You can rake in millions without doing anything, right?
Yeah. I don't know, man. It's not good. It's not for the people.
So let me hear your thoughts about the protest, because I feel like I've been talking a lot about this, and I want to give you a little bit of time.
I
to talk
haven't
about
had a lot of time to think, what I should think about it, but I'll just give kind of.
you don't have to think anything really.
I mean, I've not been
there's
to.
too much to think about.
There's so much to think about, and it seems like all the protests are very diverse too, right? Like the protests in Spokane and Portland are more different than the protests in San Diego. So there's a lot of diversity in the protests too. But kind of my general thoughts on what's going on in America with the George Floyd riots. Well, of course, what was it, May 25th?
I feel like you're kind of dog whistling when you say the George Floyd riots.
Well, Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter protests. I think
Sorry,
is more
sure.
Because they're not all riots and they're not all about George Floyd, right? I just feel like it's I don't know. I feel like it's.
I don't know the proper nomenclature.
It's kind of a dog whistle. I don't know. It's just kind of like calling it, the 92 riots, like the Rodney King riots. It's sort of like blaming it on them. I don't know.
Yeah.
And not a big point. Sorry, go ahead.
But yeah. What was it? May
I'm just
25th,
spouting
May
bullshit.
24th, May 24th, 5th?
Something like that.
Yeah, George Floyd died. And yeah, you had this huge initial reaction of what the hell? That shouldn't have happened. What's going on with our police? And, and this is kind of a sentiment in America that's been building for a long time, is that there are problems in our police force and we haven't done much to change it. And I think there's a lot of reasons why that sentiment exists. But, I think one major factor is that police are very poorly trained.
Mm-hmm.
Very poorly trained, and some of them are complete and total racists and hate African Americans. And they have no business being a police officer, yet they are a police officer. And they've gotten to the system, and they have a gun, and they have a badge. And they don't need to be a police officer. In fact, it's bad that they're police officers. Right? I think that's identified. Now, what's going on with these protests? Well, a lot of them initially were peaceful, but now they've turned not peaceful. They are not peaceful. I don't know how else to put it.
Some of them aren't, right? Like there's still plenty of peaceful protests, you know what I mean? And there's still plenty of people that are willing to, go out in the streets and fight for this change peacefully, right? But a lot of people are being pushed in a more radical direction because, in my opinion, peaceful protest has failed us, right? Like we tried that, right? And we haven't seen the change that we wanted to see, so it's time to try a different approach. That's my perspective, and that's, obviously like whitewashing it, right? Saying a different approach, is a very different way of saying, like, let's throw IEDs at the Justice Center, right?
Yeah. But they have many have turned to violence.
Yeah.
And I don't like it. I know it's kind of very simplified. I don't like violence, but it seems like there's a lot of increase in radicalization, right? People are becoming a lot more radicalized. And I think it's partly because people are attending these protests and seeing these, diverse, thoughts on what should happen. And many people are being convinced that what we should do is a massive reform and that there needs to be this massive reform. And so a lot of people are becoming radicalized. And then on the other side, you have, these right-wing activists who are saying, no, all lives matter. And all these protests shouldn't be happening, right? And I'm sure you've seen a few of those people at your
Yeah, I
protests.
got hit by a car by one of them, man.
Yeah, you got hit by a car.
Yeah,
And
like trust me, I know there are people that don't like us. Like, yeah, like I've experienced it literally firsthand. Like, yeah.
so that's also happening. And really, if this continues, as I'm seeing it continue, we would be on the brink of like a civil war, right? And that would be devastating. And I know that seems super far off, but I don't think it is.
Yeah.
Like civil war is certainly possible. There's so many pissed off people, and there's going to be a divide.
Yeah, and I mean, like the worse our economic and coronavirus related woes become, the more angry people will be, and the more they will seek a explanation for this crisis, and increasingly the sort of neoliberal consensus, the explanation given by that neoliberal consensus has failed. A lot of people are just not buying that story anymore, and they're looking for other places. And some of them are looking towards the far right and saying, well, yeah, it's a bunch of Jews that are running the whole thing, and it's a bunch of Chinese communists that are that injected us with this virus, and all these democratic communists are trying to stop Trump, and it's the deep state, and some people are going towards that route, and a lot of other people are going the other direction and saying, no, this is a inherently flawed country with is ruled by these capitalists, and ultimately we're never going to get the change we want to see if we continue down this path, and ultimately we're never going to see that change if we believe in this system.
Yeah, and so let me give kind of my perspective on the protest. Right, I think it's. I brought this up a little bit earlier, and you brought up that there were many factors, but I really do think the main factors is economic. That the reason why there are these protests is because African Americans have economic disadvantages. And it's been like that since, slavery. It's been like that for a very, very long time. Yeah. And not much has been done. More money hasn't been going to African American communities. The police in those African American communities are not trained to deal with what's taking place in those some of those African American communities. And African Americans are looking and saying that we are inherently disadvantaged, and there needs to be changes to what to our way of living. And I think that's why we're seeing these riots, is because they don't have the opportunities that we have. And it's unfair that they don't, and they have a reason to be pissed off.
And it's like, once again, it's not just black people. Like, it's like everybody. Like, it's mostly young people, but people of all races, people of all classes, people of all walks of life are coming together to stand up for this injustice. Right? Like, even though I'm not personally affected by the plight of what black people go through in this country, like I still feel morally responsible as an American and as part of the group that has benefited from that white supremacy that we've enabled in our country. I have a responsibility to stand up and fight for the other people that live in this country, right? Like until everybody is free, I'm not free, right? And that's the attitude of a lot of the young people out there.
Yeah, but I don't know. You might disagree with me on this point, but I don't feel that I'm responsible for the problems in African American communities.
It's not. I'm not saying that I'm responsible, right? I've never brutalized, African American communities directly. I'm not a cop. I don't have a badge. I don't have a gun, right? But remember how we were talking about earlier, how our community, we have these advantages because we live in this zip code. Why do you think that is, right? It's not because our ancestors and the people that lived in the zip code before us were more hardworking and smarter and more talented, it's because they were white and because they benefited from the white supremacy in our country.
Well,
right?
you
I mean,
can't. That's one.
That's
that
one
might be
factor. That's one factor.
of a thousand
That's one factor.
factors.
But what's the other factor, Gabe? Like there's
well-
I can't think of any, like if you're saying like, you know, why is this hypothetical white community wealthier than this hypothetical community of color? There's only one explanation, really, and it's systemic racism. And once again,
Wait,
systemic
you can't-
racism
no.
is a rainbow of different factors, right? And it could be that, you know, that the white people in the white community had more opportunities to go to, you know, better colleges, or it could be because you know, they weren't exposed to lead pipes, or it could be because you know, they had a lower arrest rate, so more of them were able to find better jobs. It could be a million different things, Gabe, but all of those things stem from systemic racism.
So I think this is a problem of characterization. I think you're over generalizing all the things that systemic racism entails.
Well, what does it entail then?
Look, your
Because
definition.
I can't define, like I know I've been defining it, right? But I know that I can't define it, and I know that there are people that have identified a way more sources and specific examples of systemic racism than I will ever be able to know. And so I'm just using these examples that I'm familiar with and that are easy to come up with off the top of my head. But it's a long list, and I don't think either of us are capable of defining that list.
Yeah, then I don't know. It just
Like it's easy to point individual things out and say that that's it, or that's it, and that's it. But we can't say that that's all of it, right? Because we're constantly finding new sources, and like for example, why has the death rate from coronavirus been twice as high in black communities than white communities, right? It's not that the virus is racist. Why do you think it is? I mean, like to me, I don't
there's
know.
a lot of
There's
factors
a million different factors, but all those million different factors, I call that, in my mind, that's systemic. That cloud of factors that you know, that black people are more exposed to toxic chemicals because they've had less political clout, and because you know, because they have less money, they're not able to buy as good healthcare, and because you know, when you're more impoverished, you're less able to buy good food. Like, once again, there's a million different factors, but I can't come up with all of them. So it's easier in my mind for me just to label that like that cloud of factors. Right?
Yeah, but it might not be true.
What do you mean?
Well, you're just saying it's easier for me just to say it's systemic racism.
Mm-hmm.
But you said yourself, I haven't been able to define it.
Yeah.
It's thousands of things
Yeah.
that I characterize as systemic racism.
Exactly, because
it
systemic
could not be
racism
true.
is an umbrella in all of our heads, Gabe. Like, it's not a legal category. It's not a physical category. It's just a way we define things as a society. The same way we might call something nice, right? Like, sure, my definition of nice and your definition of nice might be different, right? We have different tastes, we have different perspectives, but ultimately we all have something of an idea of what a nice thing is, right? A nice cake versus a not nice cake, right? So yeah, you know, we might all have different definitions of systemic racism in our heads, but it's useful to have that as a vocabulary word so that we can point out these things that we identify as problems that lead to these negative effects that we see in the real world.
Okay, so let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
Is the reason why we live in an affluent zip code
Mm-hmm.
because of systemic racism?
I mean, I think that, like, if it's not our individual reasons, right? Like, the reason why my family lives here is because my dad moved down to San Diego to join a startup, and initially we were looking in Carmel and Del Mar because that's where he lived here in college, and we moved east. First we looked in Carmel Valley, and then we looked in Mira Mesa, and then Rancho Penasquitos, and then Scripps Ranch, and we found a nice house here, and that's why we moved here, right? And so looking in that story, you won't find any, you know, white supremacy or benefits
Sure, and the same
of
with
that
my
white
story,
supremacy,
too.
right? But it's not about looking at individual stories, and it's not about looking at individuals, right? Although it's very important, and that's often how we learn about the effects of white supremacy and systemic racism is by hearing individual stories. But you got to look at it more broadly, right? Like you got to look at it like, why are most of the people in Scripps Ranch white? Like, it's not about looking at individual families and about how those individual families got there. It's about looking at it a little bit more broadly, because we're not just talking about my family or your family or our friend's family. We're talking about America. and the divisions within our whole in the whole country. So I think that even though it can be a useful tool for like learning other perspectives and seeing things from other people's perspectives, like, you know, talking through narrative and personal narrative, I think that ultimately we're talking about these big systemic issues. You know, talking about these individual stories doesn't necessarily help when identifying the causes of these big systemic issues. You know what I mean?
Okay, but the individual stories make up the narrative.
Oh, absolutely, right. And so okay, let's look at, you know, I'll come up with an example of a conglomeration of all these different things, right? So let's say there's 20 different families all looking to move to San Diego, right? And half of them are relatively wealthy, half of them are less wealthy, right? Right in the middle, there's an average mark, and 4 of the less wealthy families are white, and the rest of them are families of color, and you know, only, I don't know, 2 of the wealthier people are families of color, right? That right there, it's not that huge of a distinction, right? There's still you know, white people and black people and people of color all across that scale, right? But and then when you look at where all those people decide to move, their income level, you know, is a big factor in that, right? A person that doesn't make that much money probably won't live in Rancho Santa Fe, a wealthy neighborhood in San Diego. Instead, they might choose to live in a neighborhood where rent is cheaper, right? And you know, that might be because, you know, they weren't able to go to college because they had to start work right out of high school, or it could be because you know, they're a first generation immigrant and they didn't learn English right away, or it could be, and the wealthy people might be there because they were a trust fund kid, or because they worked really hard, or because you know, their parents were accountants and they got a job at their accounting firm. Whatever those factors might be, you know, once you amalgamate and put all those stories together, you start to gain a general picture. And I pulled all those stories out of my ass, and you know, they might be perceived as racist, and I apologize for that. But I'm just trying to illustrate how individual stories might you know, accumulate to create this racial difference that we now observe as a nation.
Yeah, you're right. But okay,
it's so hard to do that. Like if you start looking at the world through that perspective, I feel like you can start to fall into the trap of like blaming people, right? Where you say, hey, you're 35. You had all the opportunities. You went to public school. Why'd you drop out of high school? And like, you could have gone to college just like me, right? Once you start looking at individuals like that, you start to compare your life and their life. And what's tough with that is that it's impossible for us to get out of our own perspective. So even if we're thinking about our life as another person, right, and like trying to think about what that person's life is like, we're still thinking about us in their lives, right? We're never thinking about because it's impossible to see the world outside of our perspective because we've never done it, right? Like physically, all I've seen is what my eyes see, and all I've thought is what my mind thinks, right? And so by focusing on those personal narratives, we tend to get our own experience and our own narratives tangled up in theirs. And so that's, I think, how you get a lot of these things like you know, conservatives being like, oh, you know, it's their fault, right? And like, you know, well, of course you should go to jail for 20 years getting caught with weed. You shouldn't have been smoking weed. And like, well, why'd you shoplift that? Of course you should go to jail for 15 years, without, you know, really taking a step back and looking at it more sympathetically. Like, listen, if I was put in the exact same situation that person was put in throughout my life, I would have a different perspective. I would be a different person. I would make different choices. And I don't know, like, I'm kind of just ranting a little bit here, but I that's one thing I hate is when people on the right and people on the left do it as well, but generally I see it more from the right that they victim blame by putting themselves in that person's shoes, seemingly, you know, understanding their perspective, but not really. I would have just gone to college and gotten a good job and become an entrepreneur because I would have just gone to the bank and gotten a nice loan and I would have been just as successful as I am today. It's like, well, you don't know that because you've never not been you, and you've never not lived your life, right? I don't know. I'm kind of like, you know, speaking in truisms here, but like, I don't know. I feel like when we're talking about these stories, it is important to hear individual stories, but it's important to acknowledge that by focusing on individual stories, you miss the big picture, right? So even though it's important to like bolster the big picture with individual stories, the core and the foundation of your thoughts on these kinds of issues should be big data and facts and looking at big macro pictures, right? Instead of focusing on what this person went through, what led them to their positions where they are now. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah,
but do you think that, I don't know, it kind of seems like to me that there's this misrepresentation of what's going on with these Black Lives Matter protests on both sides, really. You know, you've been the person who's gone to how many protests have you been to at this point?
I don't know, 10, 12.
10, 12? Yeah. So you've actually been in the protests and seen what's going on.
You want to go to one today?
No,
It's
I
one at
don't.
5.
What time?
5.
5 o'clock? Where?
Downtown.
Downtown. No, I'll pass. I'll pass. I don't really want to go.
Why not, Gabe? Just come for a little bit. Cause like right now, like you're talking about it, like I don't know. I feel like your perspective is limited, right? Because like all you've heard is what other people have like processed, digested, and put through their own perspective, and then fed back to you. You know what I mean? So like you've never actually and I'm doing it too. Like you've seen what, or you've heard what I've seen and what I think of it, right? And you've heard what. I don't know what news you're watching, but you've heard whatever news that is. You've heard their perspective.
I don't.
But
really
but
go
like
through the
you
news.
haven't. I know, but like you know that there are protests in Portland, right?
Yes,
And you know you're hearing stuff, right?
Yes,
But you've never actually seen it for yourself. So I think that like even if you're like not like in support and you don't want to bring a sign or you don't want to like wave flags or anything like that, like just come for like 20 minutes and just like literally just observe. And I know you're like, well, I'll just see people standing around, like. Well, it's a little bit more than that, and I think that your perspective on the matter might change or might just be cemented. Like I don't know, like
if Black Lives Matter. Here's the thing: if Black Lives Matter meant what the name means, then I would be in full support of it. But it also means a few other things, like we need to overturn a system in America that isn't functioning.
Once again, Gabe, it's so diverse, right? And some people believe that. Right? Some people do believe that we need to overturn the system, right? But until you go there and you talk to them yourself, like you're just hearing my summation of everybody's perspective.
I'd be totally on board.
Yeah.
If they weren't violent.
Well, it's not gonna Gabe. It's not gonna get violent. Like.
Well, you don't know that.
I don't.
It can
but
turn
you can
violent.
Leave.
You said it turns violent in the night.
You can leave, Gabe.
I can leave.
You can leave.
But
like
I might want to stay.
Like I'm telling you, like. It's there are plenty of, and I watched like the streams of people that are vehemently against it, like right wingers that will go there and like be yelling at people and like saying dumb stuff, but they're still there, and as long as you're not getting violent against the protesters, you're gonna be fine. And like sure, if the cops start tear gassing us, we can leave. Like it's just a matter of walking away. You know what I mean? It's kind of like a bully situation where it's like, yeah, you'll get fucked up if you stay there, but if you just like get yourself out of the situation, you'll be fine. You know what I mean? Like the only reason I got hit by a car is because I was in the street in front of the car. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to be there. like
I don't know. I've heard some stories.
Yeah.
From you.
From me.
From you and from other people.
I should have vanillaed it out for you. Oh, it's great. It's kumbaya. We all just sit around
all
and hold hands.
Say F the police.
Exactly.
I don't know. I'm gonna pass.
You're gonna pass?
I'll pass. But you can tell me the story later.
Hey,
I'll get your perspective.
All right.
I don't know. There's a lot of stuff going on in America right now. This year is gonna be the history textbook. When it goes to 2020, is gonna be like a whole 300 pages long.
It's a new chapter. Yeah.
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 I don't know. What do you want to talk about?
I don't know. What else is there to talk about?
Let's talk about.
You want to talk about the economy, right?
Yeah, I'm interested.
Everything is fucked.
Yeah,
like
really bad.
Just like TLDR is it's bad.
It's real bad,
and it's gonna get worse.
It's going to get worse, and I mean, well, the stock market's fine.
Gabe, it's not like we lost 30% or 32. Like recently, what was it? The Fed. What was it? Or no, was it a private institution that released the report that we lost 32% of our GDP?
I don't remember if it was the Fed or not. It was.
Maybe it was Moody's. I'm not sure. Anyway, I read an ABC article talking about how we lost 32% of our GDP in the last.
That's a third.
That's a third. And to compare that to 2008, we lost 11% of our GDP in 2008, and it took us 6 years to get back from that.
What about I'm curious about what the other countries have lost as well.
Not nearly as much. I mean,
You don't think so?
China is back to 6% growth this quarter.
What?
Yeah.
Well, they could be.
For
as they've
faking it
done in the past.
Gabe, I mean, okay. If like the thing is like with China is that there's an extent to which you can fake things. If China had more cases than America right now, we would know, right? And especially because we live in America, China's biggest enemy, and our press is just waiting to criticize other countries to alleviate pressure off of our own government, right? Like some people are like, well, yeah, China probably has more cases because the government's lying. It's like, No, if there were, well, what is it now? Like 160 million, or not 160,000 people in America that have the virus. Like if China had that many, no, 1.5 million. What am I talking about? If China had that many, we'd know about it. You know.
Did you hear about that new drug that came out and that doctor? I forgot the doctor, but
The Nigerian woman that's talking about how
yeah, but there was also another
That's
doctor.
nuts. We're in the worst timeline. Like we're literally like in a satire TV show where like just like random Nigerian doctors that are talking about Jesus is giving our nation like health advice. You're like, what is going on?
But she said she had treated 300.
Dude, she got sued for medical malpractice in 2018 because she killed someone.
Really?
Yeah, one of her patients died from something that like has like a 3% death rate.
Really?
Yeah. Like don't take advice from that lady, man. Like
but there was another doctor too who was talking about it. I forget his name.
All right, but why isn't it someone from the CDC? Like we
Okay,
literally.
I have a theory about this, by the way.
Oh yeah.
So the pharmaceutical companies are in the business of making money, right? So you have Moderna, you got Inovio, you got Pfizer, you got all these big, you got Sorrento Therapeutics, which is just down the street, right? All these big pharma companies are in the business of making money. That's why you get these scumbags like Martin Shkreli every once in a while, because he can just artificially change the price of what is it, the EpiPen, or is it?
EpiPen, yeah.
Yeah, you could just change the price of the EpiPen and make a crap ton of money. He went to jail.
Yeah.
But
he went to jail for defrauding investors,
not
not for price hikes.
which is so crazy.
Because that's the crime, is lying to the rich folks.
yeah,
You can't do that. You can't
not killing
fucking
poor
poor
people.
Well, that's just
Yeah.
the game. That's what makes money.
makes my
Go
blood
ahead.
boil.
Go ahead.
But here's the theory, right? So these pharmaceutical companies are in the business of making money. If a drug was found, like what was it called, hydrochloroquine or something like that, it was this drug that they said they had made the coronavirus much more treatable. And here's the thing: if the coronavirus becomes more treatable, that is the cure. It isn't just a vaccine. If a drug becomes 98% treatable, then you don't need a vaccine.
Does whatever
Well,
make it?
she said
90% treatable?
it has like a 85%. The whatever.
So
I don't know.
why haven't the Germans implemented? Why haven't the French implemented it?
Let me
Why
get to
haven't
it.
the British implemented it? Why haven't the Chinese implemented it? You would think that if this
let
was
me
a
get to it. Let me finish the
peer-reviewed,
theory.
good scientific process, that there would be someone other than some Nigerian doctor talking about
Let me
it.
get to the theory.
Go
Let me
ahead,
get to the theory. Because once I say the theory, then you can poke holes in it,
Okay,
because
go ahead.
obviously there's going to be holes. But
I don't know. It sounds pretty airtight to me. So it's fine.
yeah, right. So the Big Pharma does not want a drug that's already been known to be effective in treating the coronavirus.
Oh, they want a patent, right?
They want a patent. They want this is the coronavirus vaccine, and I can make a crap ton of money off of it, right? Because then I can just sell it to the whole entire world and make billions overnight, right? So these pharmaceutical companies, it's not in their interest to have a drug that treats the coronavirus. So this hydrochloroquine, or whatever it's called again, it's a long name. I don't think that's actually the right name, but it's like hydro something. If it becomes the drug that treats the coronavirus, they would lose out on a ton of money. Right? And so they have been trying to silence the doctors who have been trying to tell everyone, hey, we got a treatment for this. It's called hydro whatever. And
Fauci is the boss. He's in charge of it. He's running the whole scam. He's raking it in, man. And he's a pedophile too. He goes to pizza shops all the time.
I don't know. I thought I would share that.
Go
ahead and poke as many holes as you can.
I mean, if there was like a pharmaceutical monopoly, yeah. Like if it was just Pfizer, and like Pfizer was the only company that could make this profit off a patent, I'd be like, yeah, maybe they are like, influencing the government and suppressing this discovery and this knowledge that could potentially help people. That would be horrible, right? And I think that, if the scales were in that, if the scales were balanced that way, that Pfizer or whoever would make more money if they repressed it, then I think they would. Like, and I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. But I think that ultimately, because the pharmaceutical industry is not monopolized, there's plenty of people that could make a lot of money off it. Can you grab me one too? Yeah. So yeah, if let's say Pfizer decided to start making hydrochloroquine, right? they'd make a generic version of it. They wouldn't have to put any R&D into it, right? So little to no cost. They would just have to update their pill facilities to be able to make the pill or injection or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, to bring up an example, I would say, what about all of the generic medicine that is made by these massive pharmaceutical companies right now? I mean, like ibuprofen, that patent has expired long ago, but Pfizer still makes ibuprofen, and Target makes ibuprofen, and Walmart makes their own brand of ibuprofen, all because, guess what? Like, just selling stuff that people will consume will make them a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
So even if hydrochloroquine, right, didn't improve anything, right? Even if it like became FDA approved but wasn't an effective treatment, maybe it helped 2%, increased the rate by 2%, and yet there was still a good chunk of the country that was being told by Trump and this Nigerian lady that they should buy it. Pfizer would still sell it, even if they were still working on the patent, and they would not make that much money off of it because it's not a patented thing that they own. I still think that they would do it. Does that make sense? Right?
Yeah.
Like just because there's so many pharmaceutical companies, and there's a lot of pharmaceutical companies that are just dedicated to making generic drugs that don't do any R&D and who are there just to crank out stuff that the patent has expired on and you can just produce for cents on the dollar, right?
The name is hydrochloroquine, so we don't have
Hydrochloroquine.
The name is hydrochloroquine. Yeah. It is in the interest of pharmaceutical companies to make money.
Well, yeah. And I think if I was a pharmaceutical CEO and I was allowed to make this drug, which I don't think they are because it's not FDA approved, I'd crank it out.
It is FDA approved.
Really?
Is
it a prescription though that you like?
I think it's prescription, and
Right.
it's been around since like 20-something, 2018, 2019. I can't remember, but it's relatively new in the drug world.
Malaria treatment though, right?
Malaria treatment, that's right.
Yeah,
So but what do you think about
So they've been making it. Like who else is making it other than pharmaceutical? Like if it's already on the market, they're already making it.
Dude, do you know how much more money these pharmaceutical companies
from
can
a
be
vaccine?
making from a vaccine?
Yeah, but Gabe, like you're
they could be
looking-
making tons more.
You're sort of looking at it from like an Alex Jones perspective of like that they're all like one unit and they all meet together in
big
their
pharma
secret
companies.
like that they all meet together in a secret layer once a month and decide what pharma companies are going to do as a
Lizard
whole, right? Like sure, McKesson, are they?
Yeah, McKesson.
McKesson. They might say, yeah, we can make more money off the vaccine. We're not going to make hydrochloroquine, right? But Pfizer, they got different board of directors and they got different stockholders. And if they say, well, no one else is doing it, we can make $200,000 off it. They're still going to do it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I just feel like because there's so many different ones, and not just here in America, but internationally, right? There's like pharmaceutical companies in Mexico whose job is just to rip off the ones in America, right? Where there's weaker patent law, right? Their
Yeah.
job is just to make fake Viagra and fake Cialis, right? Like they would start cranking it out too.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's just a theory. But okay. But what do you think about them?
A game theory.
So what do you think about the silencing of those doctors though? Because they got removed off Twitter. They got removed.
Which doctors? The doctors that are
The Nigerian woman and that guy, right? Because they got removed from YouTube,
Yeah.
Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, of course, because Facebook owns Instagram, and they basically said, "Oh, removed for misinformation." They couldn't. And then you had people like what was his name? The guy with the rice and he dumps it in the bowl. Was it Jim Baker? I don't know.
Jim Baker.
Yeah.
They banned Jim Baker?
No, dude. Do you remember when
Oh, he's
Jim Baker
selling
was,
it.
he was selling like
too.
silver
That's
solution or
right.
whatever?
That's right.
And he didn't get removed for misinformation. And
Well,
that
Jim Baker's
was,
been banned from YouTube for like 40 years at this point. Like they banned him before YouTube was even up and running. Like,
oh, my bad.
just joking. I have no idea.
I don't know either. He should be banned from YouTube,
Yeah,
though.
yeah. I mean, he should be banned from like public life. Really, like, he
Literally-
should not be able to speak on TV. I don't know. I feel
Yeah,
like
yeah.
We should make an exception for the First Amendment just for Jim Baker. Be like a little asterisk down there, like
Except for Jim Baker.
Except for Jim Baker, he needs to shut up. Really, like he gotta chill.
But isn't it? It's crazy that.
Okay, Gabe. Well, let me present two options. Right.
Okay.
What option one? Pharmaceutical companies have so much influence with YouTube and Twitter and other social media directly that they are able to cash in that influence enough that those companies are able to directly contradict science and truth in order to make their pharmaceutical company buddies happy, right?
Yeah.
That's option one, is that there's a big cadre and they're very connected, and that YouTube is just blatantly disobeying what it has said it's going to do by abiding these these pharmaceutical companies' wishes. Or the alternative is that the scientific community has reached a consensus that this drug doesn't work and that it might actually be harmful, and that by promoting it, you are harming the fight against the coronavirus as a whole, because you're promoting something that doesn't work, and by putting energy and money into that, people aren't putting energy and money into more effective ways of treating and fighting the virus. So which one of those do you think is more realistic? That Facebook and Twitter and YouTube were all like, well, no, like that's directly in science. The CDC says that's wrong. And we want to do our part in the fight against the coronavirus. So it's our job to make sure that all the information on the coronavirus is as accurate and efficient and effective as possible. Or do you think it's all one big cadre of satanic pedophiles that, is just one big, goat, satanic head,
No,
octopus organism?
I don't think it's that.
I don't know.
But
I'm strawmanning your argument.
You
here,
are.
but I think it's a little ridiculous. Like,
Sure,
I don't know.
sure.
Do you really believe that they have that power to like just reach out? The CEO of Pfizer hits up Susan Wojcicki at YouTube and is like, "Hey, I need you to pull off these videos," and she's like, "I'm on it," and just types away and just channel deleted. Right? Like, I don't know.
I don't know.
It seems a little unrealistic to me.
But I don't think anyone knows if they actually have that connection. But let me say this.
I'm
Do you
just
know
saying Occam's razor, right? like which one? Like the most reasonable explanation is probably the
second option?
Yeah, and it's also probably the right one. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. But let me add this. You know
like
how many
crazy stuff happens all the time, but
Sure. You know how many people have been saying they have a cure for the coronavirus? I saw the other day that person put out that if you eat onions, you won't get the coronavirus. Literally everything has been a cure to the coronavirus. I mean, you got Joe Rogan who's saying, "Oh, you need to just hop in the sauna every once in a while."
Well, what you really need is just do more jujitsu.
Yeah.
And that'll get you all good.
Yeah. So you have
Once
all
you get to a purple belt, you're good. The coronavirus can't even touch you. Yeah,
It's very ineffective.
very ineffective.
Yeah. So you have all these different people.
Look at it from like YouTube's perspective, right? You are a community moderator at YouTube, right? And it's your job to make sure that all the information on the coronavirus is as updated and as accurate as possible, right? So like when Fauci used to say that, like, hey, you guys shouldn't wear masks because there's a shortage of PPE for doctors and nurses in hospitals. You as a YouTube community moderator, when that was like the prevalent status, like that was the party line basically on COVID, you held that video up. Then when it changed and the officials and the experts start saying, "Hey, everybody should wear masks," now it's your. I don't know. I'm butchering this example.
No,
this
yeah, but you brought up a good point, which is
it's your job to like make sure that it's most accurate and most updated.
Yeah.
So if the CDC and the scientific community as a whole says hydroxychloroquine doesn't work and it's bad, and people that are promoting it should promote other things like wearing masks, social distancing, staying at home, what would you do? Would you let those videos stay up, or would you maybe just add a little asterisk at the bottom that says this is wrong information, go to this website to find the right stuff, or would you just take it down completely? I don't know.
Well, but you just brought up a good point, which is that the developments of coronavirus have changed the way that it should be represented.
Right, exactly.
Right, and so if hydroxychloroquine turns out to be effective in treating the coronavirus, then why wouldn't they put it up?
Yeah, but that would require a shift in scientific consensus, which we haven't seen, right?
Yeah,
the reason
it's pretty new.
Absolutely, and I think that if, like, all the major scientists, the WHO and the CDC and the UN come out and say, everybody start taking this, it'll treat the coronavirus, I think that YouTube and Facebook will probably follow their lead.
Yeah.
But we haven't seen that. It's just Trump and Bolsonaro and this Nigerian doctor that are spouting it off. No reputable sources have staked real peer-reviewed claims that show that this is a good thing to take and to use to fight the COVID.
Sure, but
can
you see, and I keep bringing up the conclusion before I'm bringing up the process.
I understand that, like, if the process changed and if the scientific consensus changes, then absolutely they should start promoting it, because if it's a good thing, it should be promoted. But right now, in my perspective and the perspective of most of America and the world, is that, like, no, by promoting that, you're taking up space from real effective ways of fighting this virus, like wearing masks and social distancing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you remember when Dr. Fauci was saying that wearing a mask is actually ineffective?
No, yeah, I mean that's exactly what I was citing. That like that was the consensus
At the time,
and it changed and it was wrong, right? Like,
science is a liar sometimes.
but does that mean that we need to throw all our trust out the window? Does that mean that you actually believe that you know more than the scientists in DC?
Yeah,
Like
no,
like
I
like
don't.
that's the problem I have with that idea. Like, yes, science is wrong all the time. In fact, that's the key characteristic of science, is that it recognizes that it is wrong and it
changes.
doesn't know the truth, right? And that's what really like defined the Enlightenment era, is the recognition that we don't know the truth and that we need to find it, right? But I think that I'm seeing too many Americans take the next step and saying, well, science has been wrong, therefore I know more than science, and I'm going to trust my own opinion over that of scientists, which is dangerous,
Yeah.
especially when people are fucking dying from a pandemic. Like, I hate to get like, explicit about it and emotional, but it's like, dude, it's not about like freedom of speech and it's not about like freedom of expression. It's
about
like
human
It's about
lives.
human lives. And
Sure.
it's not about like, oh, it's my body, my choice, I'm not scared of it. It's like, dude, you're going to kill someone's grandma. Like, fuck you, dude.
Yeah,
like,
you
I
have
don't know, man.
somewhat of a responsibility. So okay, but
Absolutely,
let me bring this up, right? Eric,
Yeah.
do you trust the pharmaceutical companies?
No, absolutely not.
Obviously not.
Yeah, but
Who
I trust
would?
them. I trust them more than myself. Like,
Whoa,
I know.
that is a bold claim.
Yeah,
'Cause-
when it comes to pharmaceuticals, I'm not going to try to make Tylenol in my garage to cure my headache. I'm going to trust that they know more about pharmaceuticals, right? That's the thing, is like, sure, I'm critical and I try to, engage in critical thinking, but I'm not going to try to pick fights with every single authority on every single subject, because ultimately I know that I didn't get a doctorate in chemistry, and I know that the people that work at Pfizer did, right? So even though I don't trust their political motivations and when they donate to things and when they say anything, right? But in the specific lane of pharmaceuticals or scientific knowledge in general, yeah, the people at Pfizer know a lot more than I do.
okay.
And the same thing goes for
Okay,
all
let
the
me-
other
let me bring
institutions
this up.
that
Let me bring
have
this up.
specializations. The CDC, guess what? They know more about preventing disease, right? Because that's what they're there to do, and that's what they've studied for
Sure,
their entire
and many
lives.
okay, but let me bring this up. So many times when people put their trust in pharmaceutical companies, they have been actively, hurt by those pharmaceutical companies. I'll bring up an example. So there was a family that is pretty responsible for creating the opioid epidemic in America, and that family is called the Sackler family. They're Jews, and
No, let's one quick step back. You got to put one more descriptor there before you say that they're
they're
Jew.
of Jewish heritage.
No. I'm saying that you got to be like, they're from Ohio. They've been in the pharmaceutical industry for 3 generations. Also, they are of Jewish descent, right? Like, it can't be your.
Introduction.
Yeah.
I kind of threw that. I threw that in there just to,
It's
I don't
okay,
know,
go
just
ahead,
to
go ahead.
put it in there.
Just to add some flavor.
So this family, the Sackler family, is somewhat responsible. Me saying they're
It's okay,
Jews.
it's okay, it's okay.
It was kind of
and it doesn't have anything with them being Jews. The rest.
no.
of the whole story.
It's,
Absolutely
of course,
not.
it's disconnected.
And most of the people who sell opioids are Protestants. Let's say that. All right.
Sure.
Not Catholics for sure, though. All right?
Well, I mean, by the way, did you know the Catholics have the most amount? They're the largest non-private healthcare organization in the world.
Really?
Yeah, they have 16,000 hospitals
That's cool.
around the world. Non-profit.
It's almost like it's a good model, and we should.
Implement it. Yeah.
Crazy, right?
And there's a lot of homeless shelters that were set up by the. There's a lot of homeless shelters set up by the nuns throughout America too. But continuing back on the pharmaceutical companies, so this one family, the Sackler family, they are very rich, and they made a lot of money selling a drug called hydrochlorine, or not. It's what is it called? Hydrocodone. Sorry. They sold a drug, hydrocodone, and they made a crap ton of money off of it too, because they were telling people that it was non-addictive. It had only a 5% addiction rate. Now it turns out it's more like 20% addiction rate, and they incentivized doctors to prescribe the drug. Yeah, they incentivized these doctors to prescribe the drug because they were making a crap ton of money from it. That family is somewhat, well, I'd say to a large part, responsible for creating the opioid epidemic in America. And they purposefully lied to the American people in saying that the drug was less addictive than it actually was, and that it had all these great medical benefits. And they did that partly by incentivizing doctors to sell the drug by, giving them bonuses and sending them to a trip to the Bahamas and, giving them a golf course that they could, not giving them a golf course, but, giving them
membership, yeah.
golf course membership, incentivizing these doctors to prescribe the drugs. I don't trust the pharmaceutical companies. I don't. There's nothing you can do to convince me to trust them.
Let's look at that example, right? So I think that there's an important distinction to draw between the Sackler family, right? The owners of this pharmaceutical company and the people that make this pharmaceutical company work. Because
the doctors.
I would bet, and I would put money on the fact that the Sacklers never stepped foot in a research lab, or they didn't contribute at all to the development of what was it,
hydrocodone.
Hydrocodone. They didn't research it. They weren't a part of it. So when we're talking about what they're doing and what you trust about them, we're not talking about the drugs themselves. We're not talking about the knowledge and the specialization that they bring to the American public, right? I trust that, right? I trust that the doctors and the researchers that spent time getting educated on that subject can do their job, right? However, the Sackler family's job is really different, right? It's really different than researchers and doctors. Their job is not to design pharmaceuticals. Their job is to sell pharmaceuticals. And guess what? They're pretty good at doing it. And they're better than me at doing it too. And however, the problem is that profit and their greed, we have allowed that to come above and to be prioritized above human happiness and human lives. And so I think that that's really the root problem that you're looking at is that their greed has been given priority and that you don't trust that private corporation to look out for your best interest, and I don't either. I don't. I would never put the Sackler family or any other family that's in a similar position in charge of the nation's health, right? And in fact, I'm trying to actively fight in the opposite direction, that to put people that are on the opposite end of the spectrum in charge of our health, public officials and people that are looking out for the American people, but. Once again, there's a distinction between the people that are selling these drugs and the people that are designing the systems that get people addicted to these drugs and the people that actually make the drugs themselves, right?
I think it's exactly like any product, right? Because you have a person who makes a product, you have a person who designed and made the product, or a service, of course, but a person who designs and makes a product, and then you have a sales representative, a person who sells the product, right? And it's the exact same system in pharmaceutical companies because you have the people who manufacture the drug, right? Those are your doctors. Those are your people who went to school to be able to make the perfect concoction of, this plant and this, made in a lab, put them together, and now you got ibuprofen, whatever. You have those people, and then you have the sales representatives, the people who are going to those doctors and saying, hey, you need to prescribe this fentanyl, right, which is only supposed to be given to stage 4 cancer patients. You need to prescribe to everyone who has headaches, because if you prescribe it to everyone who has headaches, then we make a crap ton of money off of it. It doesn't matter about the people. We take the human element out of it.
Yeah,
right?
But let's take a step back there, right? That it's easy to blame the individual salesman and all the individual people involved in the operation because, in some way this moral crime falls in their laps. However, I think that it's important to take one step back and say, listen, why were those salesmen motivated and why were they enabled to put profit margins above human lives and the consequences, right? The owners, right? Like they're the reason and that the company was willing to go that far. If the owners had said, listen, we're going to make this drug, but we're actually only going to sell it to cancer patients, right? We know that this drug is addictive. We know that there's that possibility. And so we want to limit its distribution because we know it can have detrimental effects to the communities.
They lose money.
If it's over distributed, right? They will lose money. And so I feel like
not only would they lose money, but they would actively let their competitors get in an edge.
Exactly. Because in this game, you need to prioritize profit over people. And if you don't, then you are not fulfilling your role as a profit maker. You're not doing your job as a capitalist, right? So instead of attacking, just pharmaceutical companies or just the salesmen or just the doctors for prescribing these things, instead, we need to take a broader look at the system and the underlying root factors that cause this system to be in place, right? So it's not enough to just regulate pharmaceutical companies or ban them from overprescribing or stop doctors from talking to pharmaceutical companies. We need to attack the root of the problem, because as long as it is in the best interest of those that rule our economy and rule our country, as long as it's in their best interest to put profit over people, we're going to continue to see that pattern replicated again and again in not just the pharmaceutical industry, but every single private industry.
Yeah. So, and tying this all back, that's why I don't trust these pharmaceutical companies to make a vaccine or to make, to make a cure for the coronavirus.
Well, so, I mean, but do you trust the people that they employ?
I trust the people that they employ. I don't trust
the
the sales representatives.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not necessarily that you're going to be shopping at Walmart for a vaccine, and it'll probably be distributed through the government, right? And I mean, I'm sure we don't trust them either, right? Because they're capitalist pigs too. But I don't know. I feel like, do you understand how in some ways it's a waste of energy to try to not rely on the specialization of specialists? Because that's really how our society has been built, is by relying on specialists that have specialized knowledge, right? So,
yeah.
and by picking and choosing and saying that, listen, I'm going to trust this specialist to make this soda and produce this can, and I trust that the people that made the aluminum in this can, process it correctly so I don't get poisoning, right?
Yeah. Of course, I have a belief in that.
We trust people all the time, right?
Sure.
And so I still trust specialists. I just distrust the system in which they work.
Yeah, I distrust the incentives.
Yeah, exactly. We're in consensus. Yeah,
I think what we're. Yeah,
I'm just trying to
each other.
I'm just trying to say that, listen, those doctors can still do the exact same thing that they're doing right now, and those researchers can still research pharmaceutical products and new drugs. However, we don't have to have those negative consequences. The two are not linked together. We can still have people finding new medicine and coming up with cures and vaccines without having an opioid crisis, without having, this over prescription epidemic, without having, faulty medicine being pumped into all of our bodies, right? They're not exclusive.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that, we're critiquing the greed and the profit motive of these companies, which I think is the root cause of all these issues that we're seeing, and not the people that make these companies actually work.
Yeah. By the way, there's still a lot of insider trading going on in the stock market. Mm-hmm. There was a story yesterday of a person who. So there was a stock called Kodak. Mm-hmm. I think I
read this one. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a company called Kodak where, first off, they got a deal. They got a deal with someone, I forgot, that basically made their stock increase by 4,000%.
It was with the U.S. government, right?
Was it with the U.S. government?
They got bailed out. Yeah.
Okay, they got bailed out by the U.S. government. Mm-hmm. Anyways, so. On the 26th, they got bailed out. Mm-hmm. A person bought, I think, 1.6 million shares of the company an hour before they went up 400, not 400,000, but 4,000%, mm-hmm. Right? And made a crap ton of money off of it. Insider trading.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And it's going on.
Yeah.
And no one's going to go to jail. Mm-hmm. No one's going to get investigated. Mm-hmm. Who knows who told them?
Yeah, and I mean, let's think about, the effects of that crime, right? How much money did that person make? Millions, right? I mean,
millions
at the least, right? Because they bought millions of dollars worth of stock, and it
went up
increased
4,000%.
thousands of percent, right?
Yeah.
They made maybe even hundreds of millions, right? Now let's compare that crime and the severity of that crime and the number of victims of that crime to, let's say, a robbery, right? And then look at the consequences of that crime, right? When someone commits a robbery, let's say runs into a gas station, sticks the cashier up, points a gun in their face and hands them a bag, says, empty the register, fill the bag full of money. The gas station loses maybe $120, right? Is in the cashier, in the register. They've got some more money in the back, but the robber didn't get to that. $120 is lost, and yet we as a society are okay with that robber being killed. When we see videos of a gas station and a robber sticking up the cashier and then someone else in the store killing the robber, we as a society clap our hands and say that's justice served. Yet the consequences of that crime were $120 being lost and that cashier, being emotionally scarred, and worst case scenario, one person dies, right? Either the robber or the cashier, someone gets shot, right? And let's compare that to this insider trading that just went on with Kodak, right? How many people got hurt by that crime? Because millions of dollars, they don't come from thin air, right? the money that was made off of that stock came out of the pockets of individual traders like you that bought that stock and didn't have the insider knowledge that other person did.
Yeah.
Right. So
Well, that's the thing that people don't understand.
So
about
many
the
more
stock
victims.
market.
So many more victims. So much more damage. So many more people hurt. Maybe even lives destroyed. And yet that person will face no repercussions. Yet I believe that they are a bigger menace to society than any petty criminal.
Sure, absolutely, and they're not going to jail either. So yeah, and that's.
And even if they do get caught and charged, they will not face nearly as drastic consequences as that robber would if charged.
But they're not
right.
even. But they aren't going to go to jail.
Exactly.
In the first place. They're not going to get investigated by the what is it?
SEC.
The SEC. Yeah, it just doesn't happen. But yeah, and that's the thing about the stock market. People don't really understand is one person's win is another person's loss.
Yeah.
And one person's massive win is a lot of people's losses. A lot of money lost. Right, that's how the stock market makes money. Is because people are willing to sell, and there's people who are willing to buy, and the people who sell lose if the people who buy win. Right, that's how it goes. But
or the other way around. There's always a loser attached to the winner.
Exactly. Yeah, and if the person sells and the person who buys loses money, then the person who sells is the winner. Yeah, stock market is really confusing. But you want to get back onto the economy as a whole. So 33% of the GDP in America was lost.
In a quarter.
In 1 quarter, which is insane.
Yeah,
Repeat that by 2 more quarters and America's collapsed.
Yeah, we have no economy.
We have no economy.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I don't know. What do you think are the ramifications of that?
Well, the ramifications is a loss in global hegemony. That's for sure. Maybe that you could say that's not even the most important.
I think. Well, I mean, just on that point, really briefly, China's economy had already passed us if you adjusted for purchasing power parity, PPP,
which basically means how much they can actually buy, right?
Yeah, because steel is twice as expensive in America. Producing 1 ton of steel counts as twice as much GDP in America as it does in China. If we just strip away all the prices and just look at like the pure amount of goods being produced and bought and sold in the country, China's had a bigger economy than America for 5 years at this point, right? So they make and process way more stuff, which is believable because there's 1.5 billion people that live there.
1.5 billion, and they have tons of manufacturing.
1.3 billion. Oh, excuse me. I mean, we've been drinking these carbonated drinks. And I've just been burping into the microphone the whole podcast.
It's probably disgusting.
Yeah, sorry about that. But I think that
a big loss in global hegemony, that's for sure.
Yeah, but I think that if America and ultimately I feel like America will continue down this path. The chances that the Trump administration pulls a Hail Mary and pulls us right out and we get a big V that just jumps us right back to where we were, that's not going to happen in my opinion. Yeah. And I think that the longer we don't deal with COVID, the longer the environmental impact or the economic impact of COVID will be. And so if we are still dealing with it into next year, China's going to replace us as the biggest economy just in flat GDP terms, right? Not even adjusting for purchasing power parity. And that will come with a cascading effect of our loss of influence and them filling that power vacuum that is left behind.
Yeah.
That's just on that one point of global hegemony.
And now we have, I think we just had, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought there was more unemployment, that unemployment rates had actually increased. I think there was an unemployment decrease, 2 months ago? Mm-hmm. And now it's back up, which is also bad. Eric was telling me before the podcast started that there were some states that had a 52, Tennessee specifically had a 57% eviction rate.
Right. That
which is over half the people in the state got kicked out of their rented
homes.
They
haven't been actively evicted because there's been a halt on evictions issued by the federal government. So, but 57% of renters have had an eviction notice filed on their house, right? So landlords, if given the opportunity, will kick out 57% of the renters in Tennessee.
And that's just Tennessee. The states surrounding Tennessee are some worse, some better, but yeah.
Here I've got the Bureau of Labor Statistics pulled up here. So, I mean, let me see, this is wrong. Oh. Yeah, I mean, just looking at that spike right there.
Jeez.
The spike is twice as high as, 2008 So as I'm looking this up, I want to find a better graph to show you. What do you think some of the consequences of those evictions will be? Like, just talking about specifically evictions, because it'll be hard to talk about, like, what a depression will look like broadly without focusing on some of the specific aspects. Because I have some thoughts about these evictions, but I want to hear what you think briefly.
Well, I haven't had much time to process it, but usually
I
when
did just say it. Yeah,
I mean,
sorry.
usually when people lose their homes, they're pretty pissed off, and riots will break out. And I brought this up earlier, but I think we're really going towards a civil war. And to think that it's not likely, it won't happen. Well, people don't have homes, they don't have jobs, they don't have anything to do. First off, people are pissed off at their government. People are pissed off with the coronavirus. People are pissed off about a lot of things. Usually, that's grounds for a civil war. Not civil war.
It depends on, like, what the fracture points look like, right? I don't know, go ahead.
Yeah, it depends on the fracture points. Yeah, and I don't know.
I'm not finding any good graphs. They're all, like, for the decade. Sorry. But
sure.
Yeah. It's probably
But yeah, when people don't have homes, what do they do? I don't know. As you can tell, I haven't had time to process it.
Yeah,
but
I mean, I
it's
think
bad.
That, I think that, like,
That's kind of the
we
general.
can look at it from, like, two perspectives, right? Like, the immediate and most obvious perspective is, like, the perspective of renters. Like, we have a mortgage on our house, but we have rented in the past, and, like, if we got evicted, let me tell you, like, and we didn't have, like, viable options for getting into a house quickly, and there was a lot of other people that were in the same position. I think that we would, start to take drastic actions. And if we can't find a job, like, and no one in the family can get a job, like, we might just take to the streets, and not with any legislation or goal in mind, but just out of pure frustration. And I think that, homelessness has been it hasn't been a critical problem for the American government, where even though, like, hundreds of thousands of Americans suffer from homelessness every single year, it hasn't been enough of a critical mass to be enough to really foment enough social unrest to be a problem for the government, right? Enough people are happy enough to butter that bread, right? But I think that if we see mass evictions and people that have not been homeless traditionally, and they haven't experienced homelessness in the past, all of a sudden be thrust into that world, they are going to want to do something with their time. And if they can't dedicate their time and energy into finding a job, and if that is a fruitless task, they're going to dedicate their time and energy to getting themselves a home, whether it be through force or through some other way, set of means. I really do think that you're going to see some drastic changes, and whether that be, shanty towns being set up at the borders of American cities, or whether it be, people violently reappropriating, properties that they were evicted from. I don't know, and I think that you're starting to see the seeds of that division between landlords and renters already start to sprout up. And yesterday in New Orleans, the state stopped the ban on evictions, right? So now landlords are able to evict tenants. However, Black Lives Matter protesters ended up blocking the courthouse and stopped landlords from going to the courthouse to file their eviction notices.
Wow.
So
really?
yeah, I can pull up a video that just shows, like, people standing in front and just, like, basically, like, body checking and just, like, standing in front of these landlords so they can't get into the building and can't kick out the renters, right? So, like,
okay, but
that's
I got a question.
That's real solidarity right there. I mean, like, just saying, like, sorry, you're not going to fuck with our communities. You can't kick us out of our houses in the middle of a pandemic. Like, and hell yeah. But this takes us to the next point, right? Is the other group of people that are affected by this, which I generally have much less sympathy for, but are ultimately still people. And
the
as
owners
a person that
of the
claims
buildings.
utilitarianism, right? Like, I got to look at them too, right? So I generally think we're going to see a massive process of monopolization if this continues to go through. If, for example, we see a long period of evictions where a good chunk of housing remains empty, and coupled with that, a high rate of unemployment, so there's a lot of people that just can't afford rent right now, you're going to see a lot of landlords go out of business, and you're going to see a lot of them go bankrupt because they don't have the cash reserves to hold on to a property for 6 months or a year or 2 years.
Sure,
instead,
because they have to actually pay insurance, and they have to pay...
for individual landlords, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at big real estate companies that and like industrial landlords that own entire apartment blocks and entire chunks of cities, they do have that capital, and they can afford to sit on an apartment and leave it empty for 6 months.
Oh, that's a good point. So they're going to take over the housing industry.
Right? And so even these small time landlords that are petty bourgeoisie, right? That still are part of the, quote unquote oppressor class, but not nearly as much as, Kushner's or Trump's or the likes of them, right? They're going to get pushed out. And I think that you're going to start to see that process be replicated all across the American economy, is that because of the way we were set up going into this crisis, you're going to see power concentrate into even fewer hands. And the people that have, sort of tentatively been part of the ruling class, like small business owners, or, like my buddy Simon, his parents own like 8 different Ace Hardware locations, and they have a big house, but they certainly, don't have billions of dollars the way the Bezos do, right? They're going to be pushed into the middle class, and they're going to be pushed even farther down, and they're going to have what little bit of wealth that they do have. They're going to see that stripped away just because they don't have the massive resources of sort of the uber rich that we are so far detached from, So I think that we're going to see like, basically like the class of like a lot of the people that live in our neighborhood, we're going to see that class become disenfranchised in a way that they haven't been in the past. Like in 2008, you didn't see the petty bourgeoisie get stripped of their power or their wealth. But I think that in this bigger crisis, we might just see that. And I don't know. I think that extreme polarization of power and wealth is the recipe for social disaster. And whether that looks like a civil war that's fought along cultural lines, like, right-wing people against left-wing people, fascists versus communists, or whether it be fought between, the American government and the people as a whole, I don't know. But ultimately, if you look at the cases of large, powerful countries falling into social strife and radical change in government, we're seeing a lot of those factors come into place in America right now. Like, let's take the Soviet Union, for example, leading up to the 1914 revolution, or 1917. I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm talking a lot here, and feel free to
go on. Yeah, the October
Revolution, right? Yeah. Mass unemployment, mass strife. People didn't have the ability to provide for themselves the way they had for a long period of time. There was social instability, right, where the Tsar had stepped down and there was a weak new transitional government in power. I think that, that's something we might see after November is this transfer of power that doesn't go as smoothly as we might have hoped. And you have generally the most important factor, an upset, dissatisfied populace. And in America, one factor that we didn't see in Russia was a heavily armed populace. Like, we are like, although, our military is even more heavily armed, we are a heavily armed populace. And individual Americans have the ability to commit violence at a mass level, much more so than any other populace ever in history, right? Like the French peasants that engaged in the French Revolution and cut off the heads of the French nobility, they didn't have assault rifles, and they didn't have, vehicles that could run through crowds of people, right? But current Americans do. And so we have... I feel like we're seeing all of the social factors for a, revolution, civil war, social strife in general. We're seeing all those social factors build up, the poverty, the dissatisfaction, the disillusionment. And then you also have the, sort of the gunpowder of a heavily armed populace that have experience and are accustomed to violence. We're used to seeing mass shootings, and we're used to seeing people take up arms for their political causes. So I feel like that is just a tinderbox ready to blow. And I think that, coronavirus has acted as the catalyst that has put this all into motion. However, the thing that we really need to be afraid of is sort of a spark that might cause all of this recipe of factors for disaster. What's going to cause all that to really mix together and ignite into something that we have not seen before in America ever before. And, I feel like the most likely thing that is going to be is the election, right? That's going to be the flashpoint of whether it's Biden that wins or Trump that wins or, whoever it is that wins. There's going to be disagreement no matter what, like whether it's Biden clinching the victory or Trump clinching the victory, or a close tie between the two, or Trump cancels the election and doesn't have it. Like no matter what the outcome is, there is going to be a good chunk of the American population that is dissatisfied enough with that outcome, and if they feel disillusioned enough and hopeless enough, they might be willing, and it might seem logical to commit violence as the best alternative, right? That might just be the best course of action for a lot of Americans. Now, I'm not saying that objectively. I'm just saying a lot of Americans might genuinely think, hey, the best choice for me, my family, my community is if I actually go out there with an AR-15 and kill people. And I'm not advocating for that at all. I'm just saying that, whether it's people on the left or people on the right, or the government itself, those factors will be in place. And I think that, I don't know, it's not something that's alien, anymore, right? Like killing people over politics is not out, it's not crazy town anymore, right? Like the way it was in the 50s or 60s. It's happening right now, right? Yeah. Like a guy got shot in Austin because he was part of a protest, right?
Sure. And in 2016 too, there was a guy, I forget his name, Jackson something, who shot 11 police officers.
Sure.
Happens on both sides.
Okay. I mean, if you really want to quote which side is more violent, right? In the last 20 years, there have been 345 murders that were identified as right-wing white nationalist murders, right? Like that was the reason that murder happened. And there have been 0 left-wing Antifa murders, right? That were done by Antifa left-wing radical groups, right?
Yeah. I just brought up that point. That's kind of a side point. We can talk about that later. But
right.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good summation of what the sentiment is right now.
Mm-hmm. At least that's my perspective. I'm sure there's plenty of Americans that are like, I just want everything to go back to normal so I can just grill my burgers and hang out with my family. And that's probably a third of the country that is fine with like their physical needs are net. They still have a job. They still have a retirement to go fall back on, and they just want things to be back to normal. But I feel like the other 2/3 of the country are want things to change, and whether that be in the direction of an ethno state, or whether that be in the direction of a socialist state, I'm not sure. And I don't really want to try to tether it down too much, but yeah, that's just the way I feel. Sorry, I feel like I've been talking too much.
No, you're not talking too much at all. I'm immensely interested in kind of your perspective on what the sentiment is right now. I feel very similar to that too, which is there's a lot of people who are pissed off, but it seems like there are some people who just want to go grill burgers, like you said, in their backyard and maybe have a little barbecue. Mm-hmm. And
but that used to be most people.
That used to be most people. Now,
if you look back at the 80s and 90s, that was 90 to 95% of the people were like, yeah, I mean, sure, some minor changes could be done, like, restricting abortion or, banning guns or whatever your political opinion is. But now all of a sudden, I feel like a critical mass of the country genuinely believes that radical change is needed. And there isn't a consensus on the direction of that change, but there is a pretty broad consensus that change is going to happen whether we want it or not. And let's make sure that it's our kind of change as opposed to their kind of change.
And I think this increase in polarization has been growing for a very long time, where it's either this, you're either Republican or you're Democrat, and that's the only way that we can view you, because then I can characterize you as a Republican and Democrat, and that makes it easy for me to think, But yes, we're seeing this rapid increase in polarization now, where you have these, radical. I would call them radical people at these Black Lives Matter protests who are, saying we need a massive police reform, we need to cure systemic racism in America and all this stuff. And then you just have the opposite of that, which is the right-wing people who are saying, all this is nonsense, we just need to keep the things the way that they are. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of...
But let's talk about who do you think is going to be the spark between the two? Because I don't know. My experience is that, and my perspective is that generally the right is more violent and more ready to commit violence to meet their political goals, and that might be because of a generally more masculine culture on the right wing, or it might be because of the glorification of military or the police, or of American imperialism abroad. There's a ton of different reasons that you can try to pin down as the reason for that willingness to commit violence, but just looking at the empirical evidence of who has committed violence and who has been the victim of that violence at these protests, I would say that it is generally the counter-protesters that are committing violent acts. Now, I'm sure you can pull up a video of a Black Lives Matter protester punching someone in the face or knocking someone down or throwing a rock at somebody,
or smashing windows.
Yeah, but they haven't killed anybody, right? And we can try to stack up like black guys versus black guys, and this person got one tooth knocked out, and that's equivalent to this person getting hit in the nose, right? We can try to tally up all of the injuries that have been inflicted by both sides, but nobody has been murdered by the Black Lives Matter protesters, and Black Lives Matter protesters have been murdered by counter protesters. And I know that may seem like an oversimplification, but just talking about who is willing to use lethal force to see their political agenda fulfilled, as of now, the evidence points that it is the counter-protesters that are much more willing to use that lethal force. I don't know. Do you agree with that? Because I'm.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it seems
I'm seeing you're making the face that you're about to hit me with whoa, like
that's exactly what I'm about to hit you with. Well.
Yeah.
Did I mess with the mic? Hopefully
it's
still.
Are we looking good?
I think it's okay. I think it's fine. Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, but I don't know. I saw an article the other day that said the headline was like something peacefulness intensifies, right? And it was talking about how the peaceful protesters became more violent, right? And it said peacefulness has intensified. Well, that's not what peaceful intensifying means. Peaceful intensifying means it's becoming more peaceful. And this is kind of a attack on the, representing of how the protests are actually going. Mm-hmm. I think it's in the interest of, and you can poke holes in this, but I think it's in the interest of these media companies to continue presenting that the protests are peaceful and that they haven't done any harm to people. Mm-hmm. Right? Because they want to continue the social they want, I don't know how to put this. They want to continue social unrest because they're trying to win an election, right? And these media companies are mostly hoping that Joe Biden wins.
Well, I mean, I think that ultimately, let's start with some premises, right?
Sure. So my point is that I don't know because I feel like the information at the protest is being misrepresented.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, that's a blanket statement that we can say just in general. Any information that you have about the protest that wasn't just like watching a live stream and seeing directly what's happening is propaganda, period, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's, the left putting it out or the right putting it out or CNN or
it's
Fox
for a
News.
Purpose, that's
no
for
matter
sure.
what, it's propaganda, right? And that's just something we can just put out there baseline, which is why I want you to go, right? And that's the main reason is because like right now, you're just repeating various like propaganda points. And I don't mean that as an attack on you. That's just the reality of hearing things from a secondhand source, and then relying on that secondhand source. But I think that the difference in reporting that you're seeing is the distinction in elite opinion on the protests. Right now, the important thing to note is that there is no corporate media outlet that is calling for radical reforms. Right, like all of them will tentatively support it. Like the protests in general, they'll say Black Lives Matter and they'll say that, these people have a right to be here, right? But you'll never catch a CNN anchor talking about abolishing the police, or you'll never catch a CNN anchor talking about, reducing the racial injustice in our criminal justice system, right? Or you'll never hear them talking about, the disproportionate arrest of people of color for drug-related crimes and therefore passing, decriminalization legislation in order to alleviate that pressure. You'll never hear them talking about those radical proposals, right? What you'll hear is them tentatively supporting, talking about, the counter protesters, but generally just trying to keep liberals just tentatively on board, but not fighting for the radical change that a lot of the people in the movement are fighting for. And generally taking the stance that these protests are peaceful and the people that are violent at these protests are agitators, or they're people from the right, or they're just white people that are harming the movement as a whole. Like, I feel like that's my summation of the liberal media's perspective on the protests, and I'm sure I missed a couple of points there, but that's my general summation. And the right wing media is generally more antagonistic and more likely to display these protests as violent anarchists that are destroying American democracy and trying to destroy the whole country, right? But ultimately, you're never going to see any of the radical proposals being brought up by protesters be discussed in the media. And I think that is a representation of elite opinion on these protests, is that there's plenty of liberal elites that support the protesters and say, yeah, Black Lives do matter. And yeah, we'll slap a Black Lives Matter, little, what's it called? Yard sign in front of our $10 million mansion. But we're never going to support radical change in the justice system because that could threaten our wealth and our power in the system as is. Kind of makes sense? So the only reason you see that distinction between the left and right media is because there is a distinction within elite opinion, right? Like, sure, you have plenty of wealthy people that are like, yeah, just like gas them and get them out of the streets. I don't care about the right to protest. I want them out of there, right? And that's more of the NFL owner type of elite, right? More conservative, less sympathetic to these social causes, but ultimately, like their legislative stance on the protest is the same, whether it's a Hollywood actor that tweets hashtag Black Lives Matter, or whether it's an oil baron that wants them off the streets no matter what it takes to get them there, right? Ultimately, their legislative position is the same, which is we want no change because that change wouldn't benefit our financial class.
Well, yeah, and it threatens their positions as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know. It's to your main point. Yeah, I think there's a lot of misrepresenting what's actually happening at the protest on both sides, and yeah, and so when you bring up statistics and how the public actually perceives it, I just don't think you can make any conclusive points about it because who actually knows what's going on unless you go there and you see it yourself.
That's why you should come, Gabe. I feel like you're just making the.
I'm making the case.
Yeah,
for
you're
me
making
to go,
the point.
I don't want to go. I don't want to go.
Like, okay, what's stopping you? Let me ask. Like,
sure.
I know it's because of the violence, right? But like, what specific scenario is in your head that's like actually stopping? Because I'm sure like. I don't know about you, but that was the reason I felt like tentative. Is like in my head, I just imagined myself getting pulled into a line of cops and getting arrested and like having to spend the night in a jail cell. And that was like the scene in my head that was like deterring me from going. Like, do you have a specific scenario that's like the
I think what's
like
turning me away the most from going to the protest is the people at the protest, because I feel like the people who are actually at the protest are they don't actually want what's best. What they want instead is this kind of anarchist perspective, right? Which is, I'm bored and I want to do something. And if I can go here and throw water at police officers, that sounds like a lot more fun than, sitting inside.
Yeah.
And so
I apologize if my perspective has anything to do with your perspective on that.
No, well, it does, obviously. I just don't want to support that. I don't want to support an anarchist, and I'm using the word anarchist, but it's a lot less severe than that.
I think that, like, once again, you've sort of fallen into the trap of, like, generalizing, right? And because you haven't seen the nuance of the protest yourselves, it's easier to, like, in your head just generalize like that, right? And I think that the one that's today is going to be really peaceful. Like, the one that's tomorrow is definitely going to, like, shit's going to go down, like, just based on the flyer. It says like 18 plus, like no minors, don't come if you're under 18, and like it's a planned civil disobedience as opposed to a protest. And I think that distinction is hinting at that you're going to see a difference in the outcome of these protests. But the one today, it looks really peaceful, like just in terms of what I've seen and based on my experience with these protests.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay,
like,
so this is
to the broader point, like. You might believe that everybody's just these bored teenage anarchists that want to go fight cops for fun, but and that might be true. Like sure, there are a lot of people there that are kind of just there because they've got nothing else to do. But you're never gonna know that really until you see it for yourself. You know what I mean? And that might be true, and you might. It might confirm your opinion going there, but I think that you shouldn't hold that opinion until like you've seen it for yourself as opposed to hearing it from someone else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even me, like I've totally I feel like I've misrepresented the protest in a way because all you've heard is, you know, kind of from me, right? So you've kind of just heard my perspective.
I've heard it from other people.
Yeah, I know you've
too,
heard it, but we've talked for
hours
and hours and hours
yeah.
about it. So I feel like my perspective and my experience has probably, you know, dominated your view, and so I think
I mean, I consider other perspectives.
Yeah,
too,
but I think that
yeah,
you should
majority
really,
of my information.
You should, you know, come up with your own conclusions. You know what I mean, and not just like reacting to my conclusions and like, you know, my experience. Like you gotta, I don't know. I feel like you gotta be there for yourself.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I should go to at least
like just
one
for
of them.
20. Like I'm not saying like come march with us for 4 hours.
Sure.
You know?
Just
like,
kind of go scope out the scene.
Scope out the scene, see what the signs say, see what like because another thing that like I've kind of failed to mention is that there's a lot of conversations happening, right? It's
So
not
you're just
just
talking with
chance,
people.
and it's not just you talking to your friends. Like real conversations about the issues as a whole will pop up, and you know I'll sort of eavesdrop, and you know. You'll hear, you know, there are common fault lines that you'll often hear people talking about, right? You know, you'll generally see people talking about, you know, a more radical or more moderate position on Black Lives Matter, right? You'll see people advocating for, you know, abolishing the state, abolishing the police, and them having discussions with moderate people saying like, hey, no, let's just stick to police reforms for now because we can't abolish the state right now. Like, let's just do something realistic or let's just, you know, get these reforms, you know, passed. And you see those, you know, those conversations take place all around you, right? And those conversations really sort of represent what's being talked about all across America. And by, you know, restraining your perspective to what journalists think about it, or what you know your direct circle of friends think about it, or what I think about it. I don't know. It's kind of doing the movement a disservice and you yourself a disservice, because at the end, like, ultimately, you know, I know we started by saying that these protests are never going to end. Ultimately, they will end, right? It's not going to last for 20 years, but 20 years down the line, I think that you'll be happier knowing that you went to at least one and saw it for yourself, as opposed to only having read about it or seen it or heard about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like
Certainly
we don't know how many opportunities you got left. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know. I think what's really holding me back is just the people at the protest. I feel like
I'm telling you don't know.
I feel like it's not going to be a good crowd, man.
I just be with me. You know what I mean? Like if you come today, like we'll just kick it.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, we'll go get dinner. You know what I mean? Like we can have a good night. You know what I mean? I just want to like, you know, take you there and like show you what's popping. You know what
I mean, you've
like,
been like 12. At this point.
Like at this point, I don't know. I haven't been keeping track, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like. And I feel like it's a lot more diverse than you think it is. Like I'm sure in your head, like it's just a bunch of people in like black hoodies with, you know, masks and, you know, scary slogans, baseball bats, and
throwing rocks.
Yeah, those people are there, right?
Yeah.
and they definitely are there. But there's also like grandpas, and there's also Navy veterans, and there's also 14-year-olds that are just there because they saw the hashtag, and you know, there's so many different kinds of people at these protests that all have different opinions and all have different ways that they think this should be resolved. And I think that not listening to that variety of opinions is sort of doing
myself a disservice. Sure.
Yeah, and you're also, you know, not getting as whole of a perspective as you could possibly on the movement as a whole. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's information down there that I don't have, and I want to, you know, improve my
and I think you'd have
perspective.
You'd have a better.
I'll consider it.
Yeah,
I'll consider going. I don't know. I think the main thing that's holding me back is I do support Black Lives, of course, of course I do. And the thing and what happened to George Floyd was terrible, and I think it's pretty universally agreed that. Well, I hope it's universally agreed that
there's plenty of people on the right that were like, no, he was a drug dealer, he deserved it, like he was a criminal, like
that's a terrible thing to say,
and it's not like
true. It's not true.
It's not. Well, obviously, it's not true, right? Nobody deserves to die. But what am I gonna say? Yeah, it's not an insignificant portion of this. Like there's a good chunk of this of our country that is overtly and blatantly racist, right? And is and like. Genuinely believes that America should be a racist nation, right? And I know it's like shocking to hear that, but like when you see like the boomers that are like standing in front of Confederate statues telling the kids to go back home and like, you know, just shut up, like I can't think of any other explanation than they like want America to be a racist country. Like I know that's
Yeah,
oversimplification.
it's not, I don't think
but-
it's
but
significant. I don't think
why-
there's a
why-
significant amount of people though. I think
dude, like I don't know, like I wish I could just pull up all these videos that I've seen on r/public freakout. But like you know, they're like. Let me come up with a good sentence
Take
here,
a few
right? Yeah, I'll
breaths.
take a couple breaths. Take a minute.
I can
catch
tell
my
you're
breath.
flustered.
These fucking Nazis in Texas held a rally because they thought that there was going to be an Antifa flag burning rally, right? That these people were going to come to Beaufort, Texas, where there's a Confederate monument and burn American flags. Now, it was fake, right? It was set up by people on the right wing, or you know, it's my impression that it was right wingers that falsely advertised this imaginary Antifa gathering in order to drum up anti-Antifa supporters, basically, right? And they held this huge rally with several hundred people, right? Of you know, people wearing, you know, American flags, and you know, probably the average weight of this crowd was above average, I'll say, and you know, mostly white, actually all white. I don't think I saw a single person of color in that crowd, and there were counter protesters to this counter protest, right? And there was probably 5 of them, young people that held Black Lives Matter signs and a Black Lives Matter flag, and they were chased out of this town. Like, they were literally gang rushed by these people and were physically assaulted until the police had to surround them and bring them out of the town. And so to say that, you know, this is not a problem we have to worry about, and this is something that we can just sort of conveniently ignore, is America's blatant racists, I feel like is doing ourselves a disservice. Because if we choose to ignore this problem, that there are blatant racists in our country and they hold political office and they have real power in this country, we're not going to be equipped to fight them and take that power away from them unless we first recognize that is a situation that we have to deal with.
I think you're hitting on a tough topic, which is, well, I think it's connected to freedom of speech, right? Because should these blatant racists have the freedom to speech and the right to protest? Because it's pretty universally accepted that it's obviously wrong, right?
Well, they don't have the right to assault people.
Oh,
and
that's
they
for
don't,
sure.
And they don't have the right.
Well, neither do the protesters.
Yeah, absolutely. But I just think that I've seen again and again at these protests a difference in enforcement of laws based on the political position of protesters.
Sure.
For example,
police probably are siding with the people who are supporting them.
Yeah, in Eugene, Oregon, I saw this one video of a Proud Boy. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but it's Gavin McInnes's right-wing nationalist group that is, you know, dedicated to traditional ideals, and basically what they do is they're hobbyists that get together in a group of guys and just go fight leftists. Like, that's what they're there to do, is they get together in a gang and they go beat people up, right? Now, a Proud Boy in Eugene punched 3 protesters in the face and just walked away, and then the police line came in, and instead of arresting that Proud Boy that they had clearly witnessed punch 3 people right in front of them, right? They chose to tackle and arrest a 14-year-old girl who was one of the people that was hit by this Proud Boy. Now, that's just one specific example, and I know that by, you know, cherry picking specific examples like that, I am in a way mischaracterizing what's really happening in this country. But I've seen that pattern be repeated again and again. Maybe not that explicitly, but certainly enough for me to notice a pattern of a difference in enforcement of these laws. So when racists in Texas assault teenagers, they don't get arrested, they don't get tear gassed, they don't get shot with pepper bullets. But when Black Lives Matter protesters throw rocks at a building, they deserve to get tear gas, and they deserve to get put in handcuffs, and they deserve to get charged. Like, to me, there is a clear difference in the enforcement of laws in our country based on the politics of each individual protest. And I think that, you know, if we're gonna be a country of law and order that enforces laws, those laws need to be enforced equally. And if you commit a crime, you should go to jail. And if I believe that there's a stipulation there that you shouldn't go to jail for committing that certain crime. It shouldn't matter what your political beliefs are. Then you shouldn't go to jail. Like politics has nothing to do with crime, right? Now we get to the issue of free speech and racism, right? Like, to what extent is a person's racism protected by free speech, and to what extent does their right to free speech get undermined by people's right to live without being hurt by racism, right? Can you agree that that's the issue here, right?
Yeah.
Like,
of course, it's not about violence. Like, if someone punches another person in the face just because he's a leftist, that person should be, arrested.
Right. I'm glad we agree on that. Right?
Obviously,
but then let's bring up the issue of, hey,
should we allow racist speech in America?
Yeah, exactly. Like, you're in Burger King. Let's say you're not involved in this at all. You're ordering your burger and you hear two people start yelling in the restaurant, right? And they're both sitting, they're both customers, they both got their burger. One's a old white man, and one's a young Latina lady. And the white guy is yelling at this lady for speaking Spanish to her mom on the phone, right? Now, technically, the First Amendment protects that guy's right to harass and verbally assault that woman. However, I don't believe, and I feel like most people in my generation believe, that I don't want to live in a society where that guy can get away with that. And so, let me elaborate, right?
Sure.
Do I believe that guy should get sent to jail for 5 years for being racist? Not necessarily. But I think that generally what you're seeing is because the government has not decided to enforce this new social consensus that being outwardly and publicly racist is not okay, we've taken it upon ourselves to fulfill that role of enforcing that social rule. And that's...
Yeah, we apply social pressure to the guy stops.
Exactly. And largely, that's what you're seeing in, like, cancel culture, right? So, like... And not totally, right? And that's a whole different topic, and I sort of want to avoid talking about cancel culture using that term, because it's a charged term that people have existing perspectives on, and we'll never be able to get away from those perspectives. But when you see somebody, let's take a recent viral video of a white guy in San Francisco berating an Asian family while drunk. So he was at this restaurant and he was just yelling at these people. And initially he's just yelling, being like, "You guys are too loud. Why are you talking?" Just drunk babble of just an angry drunk guy that's just yelling at whatever. And then once the camera starts rolling, he eventually switches into a racist rambling, right? Of calling them all sorts of racial slurs and yelling at them. And then the waitress immediately comes up to this guy and kicks him out of this restaurant, and he's out, right? So right there, you just saw, a non-legal enforcement of the social norm that you can't be publicly racist right there, right? Just of the waitress saying, "We don't want you in our restaurant." She didn't check with the manager. She didn't check with the owner of the restaurant. She individually had that power and decided to enforce it, that you can't be racist to other customers in the restaurant, and so you have to leave, right?
Yeah.
Do you agree that they have the power to do that? That
yeah, absolutely.
Individual businesses and individuals...
Sure, they can refuse the right to serve anyone they want.
Right.
It's within their power.
Now comes the next step, right? The next way we as individuals have chosen to enforce this new social norm that we believe in, and that's... attacking that person. And this is where it gets real controversial is well, that guy actually resigned from his job as a CEO of a tech company in San Francisco. But in many cases, we've seen, Twitter and netizens, people online, generally attack the company or wherever that person is employed enough that they get fired. And this has happened time and time again, where they've lost their job because of something they did not at their job. Now it starts to get real controversial, right?
It's cancel culture.
And some people say, "Oh, this is horrible. It's getting way out of control. You should be able to say what you want. You have the freedom of speech." But I'm generally more in the other camp. And I think that a lot of people have this anti-cancel culture perspective because the media they consume is from people whose peers are directly affected negatively by this culture, right? Like, if you listen to Joe Rogan for your news, you're probably going to be pretty anti-cancel culture because of a lot of his friends have been negatively affected by cancel culture, right? So he has an automatic bias, and he could possibly be affected by cancel culture, right? Because he is a celebrity whose money and fame relies on the perspective and the opinion of the public. He's at risk of being canceled, right? And I feel like that's one reason for people generally being anti-cancel culture, when in reality they're not affected at all. You know what I mean? Like you haven't been affected at all by cancel culture, yet my guess is you probably have an anti-cancel culture perspective. Is that accurate to say?
I'm not on social media. I don't
No.
have
I know you don't. But like when you hear the word cancel culture, does your mind go yeah or
obviously I have a negative interpretation of cancel culture.
Yeah.
Look,
so you even say obviously, as if it's guaranteed within the statement that cancel culture is automatically a bad thing. But let me elaborate, right? That a lot of young people, and that's mostly who's doing the canceling, right? Can we agree on that it's not a lot of 60-year-olds going on Twitter and complaining about racists, right? It's mostly young people doing that. We've reached a new conclusion and a new consensus within our generation that doing these X things is not okay, right? And that list of things that are not okay is a longer list than the law, right? So now all of a sudden we've agreed, and I know I'm generalizing. There's plenty of people in my generation that don't agree with anything I'm saying at all. But I'm generalizing for the sake of the argument. So we all agree. Let's say that being racist like that in public is not okay, and as a consequence, you should be punished, right? Now I know you probably don't agree with that, and plenty of other people in my generation don't agree with that, but enough of our generation agrees with that we have the collective power to pressure someone out of that job, right? Now at this point, a lot of people, and the reason we do that is because we believe that was morally wrong, right? Doing that thing was morally wrong, and it should not happen, and others should be deterred from doing it in the future. So a lot of people, when looking at issues like this, look at it from the perspective of the person that got canceled, or the person that was doing the free speech, right? Or what they call free speech. And from that perspective, yeah, it can seem unfair, and it can seem biased, and it can seem like an oppressive Orwellian, conspiracy that's just sniping down all my favorite people, right? Like, oh, I liked Crystalia, I didn't really care about him, Snapchatting and talking to those underage girls. It's not an issue for me, right? But enough people have decided that they don't want that to continue to happen, and have decided to enforce that using their own means, right? So instead of looking at it from the perspective of, listen, that one CEO that got fired as a result of his racist tirade didn't deserve to be fired, and he could have, redeemed himself and learned to have a different perspective. Instead of taking that perspective, the individual perspective, we need to look at it more broadly, and look at it from the perspective of other people that are in similar positions of power and have the ability and maybe even the underlying perspective that is necessary in order to engage in a racist tirade like that. So let's say, Facebook's CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, is actually a racist, and he, has all these racist thoughts, and when he sees, an Asian family at a restaurant, he's thinking all this nasty stuff. But now all of a sudden he knows that if he says that stuff, he's going to get canceled, and he's going to get fired from his job as CEO, and he's going to lose a lot of his money, and he's going to lose all of the respect that he's accumulated over his entire career. So now, even though it's legal for him to say racist stuff, he's been socially pressured to the extent where he is not willing to say those things, right? And now some people might say, that's not good. People should feel free to say what they think, and people should, have the ability to express themselves in America, right? That's what the First Amendment's all about. But the thing is that expression and social expression is not an individual thing, right? Social expression is ultimately constrained by society as a whole. And society, whether we like it or not, is constantly deciding what is an okay expression of your opinions and what is not an okay expression.
Wait, no, that's not right. When you have individual expression, that means my thoughts are my own thoughts, and that I share my own thoughts. Yeah. It's not, sure, you're influenced by people, but that doesn't mean that all the things that you speak is so that you can please other people.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that what gets put forth and what gets promoted and what gets adopted and discussed is not decided by individuals, right?
Yeah, it is. It
No,
is
no.
decided by
Let me
individuals.
finish.
Sure,
right?
go ahead and
It's
finish.
decided by society as a whole, right? So if I make a really great piece of art and I think it's really awesome and it's really nice and I think that everybody should talk about it, discuss it, and look at it, I don't have the power to decide that. And if I have an idea that I think is really important and that everybody should discuss and everybody should talk about, I don't have that power. Now, I have the power to express it as an individual, and I express power to write it down or to try to get it in a gallery, to try to get a news article about it. But ultimately, society as a whole decides what society is constructed of, right? We as a society have decided that you need to wear shoes and a shirt in order to eat in a restaurant. Now you can not, right? You can go into McDonald's without shoes and without a shirt, but chances are that because you've broken a societal rule, you're going to face consequences. Now, in this case, you'll probably just get politely asked to leave the McDonald's, and if you don't leave, they might call a security guard or even the police to enforce those societal rules, right? But do you understand how we have rules in a society and what it operates in that society, what gets put forth in that society, and what is able to be expressed publicly in that society is constrained by the opinions of people in society. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, that's just social pressure.
Exactly.
But
So that's what I'm saying is that my generation has had a shift in perspective, and that shift in perspective has resulted in a shift in behavior, and because we have a different idea of what we want the world to look like, we are using our individual voices, right? And our individual power to express to enforce what we want the world to look like. Now, that can seem tyrannical. I mean, enforcing rules on what you want the world to look like. What do you young fucks think you're doing, right? You know, that's not up for you to decide. But it kind of is. And I'm not talking about me, or I'm not talking about my friends, or I'm not talking about, you know, the BLM movement. I'm just talking broadly, right? That we decide what's in society. And if we have collectively decided that we don't want that in society, if we aren't given the legal method and the legal ability to enforce that, then we are going to use our own individual power to enforce that. And right now, we've been given the power of social media, and so we're using that power to enforce our individual opinions. And in doing so, we're expressing ourselves. So you could say that cancel culture is a detriment to free speech, and cancel culture is betraying Western values of free speech and the ability to criticize and to think critically. But from my perspective, what you're seeing is a mass demonstration of free speech. We all have the power to criticize this person, and we're all freely choosing to do so.
Yeah,
because
we're all freely choosing to silence his free speech.
Absolutely, and that is how society has worked for millennia. And you can say, no, back 100 years ago, you could say whatever you want, but that's not true, Gabe, and you know it.
Well,
we've always had
all
constraints.
Of human history,
all of human history,
we've had
society
social pressure. You can't
has told you what you can and cannot say, and we're simply seeing in a change in that list of things, right?
Yeah, if I just went to the supermarket and screamed out, "I hate Jews," right, I would hope they would kick me out.
Right, and if you went into an airport and said, "I have a bomb and I'm going to blow it up," guess what? You get tackled by TSA and arrested, right?
Exactly.
Like free speech is a concept, right? And it's an idea that isn't real. And I hate to say it because it's important, and it's important to my ideology that people have the freedom to express themselves. But ultimately, acting as if free speech is this untouchable, enshrined, God-given right ignores the fact that it's not real, and it's not enforced, and it's not prevalent in our lives at all, because guess what? We don't live in a world of free speech.
Okay, well,
we are constrained by other people's opinions, and we do face the consequences of the things we say. And so I guess in a way, yes, that is a world of free speech where we just are able to say what we want and we face the consequences of that. And if you take that perspective, guess what? Cancel culture meshes perfectly with free speech. In fact, it's just an extension of facing the consequences of your actions, right? But I don't know.
Let me say a few things.
Yeah,
So
go ahead. I've been talking for 20 minutes.
No. I like to listen more than I like to speak. But if we look at where free speech has been silenced, where people haven't been able to say what they want to say, the first thing that pops into my mind is
The Soviet
Union,
yeah,
right?
of course.
Because you couldn't say what you wanted to say. You couldn't criticize the government. You can't criticize the government in China. You can't even talk about the history.
You can. See, here's the difference, right? Is it's the same process, just more and less extreme, right? In China, you can walk into a bank and say, "Fuck the CCP. They are murderers and they are exterminating the ethnic people of Tibet and Xinjiang and Mongolia." And you have the power to say that, and you can say it, right? There's not going to be an invisible wall that you run into. And it's the same thing in the Soviet Union. You could have walked up and stood on the table and yelled to the other workers in the factory, "We need to unionize, we need to stand up for our rights, and we need to overthrow the authoritarian government that is restricting our rights."
You couldn't. You would die.
Hey, guess what, Gabe? And
you would die. You would go straight to the gulag.
Let me finish, right? So those are the consequences of that action.
Oh my goodness! Wait, so you're saying that?
I'm saying
that's such a bad point.
No. Okay, ready? Let me elaborate. Right, that every society has a not necessarily agreed upon, but an established precedent of free speech, and whether that society claims to uphold those values or not doesn't really make a difference, because ultimately society constrains what we say no matter what, right? So whether you're living in Slab City where you can kind of say whatever you want, you're still constrained, because if you say the wrong thing and piss off the wrong guy, he'll kill you, right? So there's still consequences to your actions even without a government at all, right? And the fact is that in the Soviet Union and in modern China, the process is, radically different in many ways. The fact that you'll face legal repercussions for your speech is radically different than here in America. But from my perspective, it's the same process of enforcing our agreed upon list of things you can and cannot say. Now, those lists are very different, right? The Chinese list of things that are acceptable to express publicly, it's a short list. And I'll be honest with you, right? So as a Chinese person, I wouldn't feel like I have the ability to express myself nearly as freely as I do right now as an American person. However, ultimately, me as an American, I still don't feel completely free to express myself.
Well, in all of human history, people haven't been completely free to express themselves.
Do you understand my point, right? That everything is on a scale, right? And there's benefits and negative consequences of being on either end of the scale, right? Now, it's true that the Soviet Union and China fall more on the restrictive end of the scale. But I think that
it's not a scale, because in the Soviet Union, if you said certain things, you would die. And so
so right. Let's elaborate, right? So you don't know that. Okay, right? Like let's
I do know that.
No. So yes, if you are a member of the Politburo Standing Committee in the Soviet Union and you criticize Stalin when Stalin's in power, yeah, you'll probably die. But if you are just a factory worker and you're passively criticizing the government as a whole, you might find yourself shipped to the gulag. Now, you are in prison for the rest of your life. But did you die? No. So you're speaking in absolutes.
It would have been better to be dead than to be in a gulag.
You don't know that because you've never been to a gulag.
Oh, well, I've heard the stories of the gulags.
Okay, you've read the Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn?
I've read The Last Circle as well.
Okay, all Solzhenitsyn books. Have you read any pro-Soviet Union sources on gulags?
Who the hell would be pro-gulag, Eric?
No. Okay, I'm just saying that. Sorry,
I think you're making kind of a weird point
here, man. I'm just saying that
man.
you're speaking in absolutes, Gabe. You're saying, yeah, if you say anything, you'll die. That's not how society works. The same way that if you say something bad in America, you don't have your career canceled.
I'm being very specific.
It's not that absolute.
I'm being specific. If you criticize Stalin. If you criticize Stalin during the communist of the Soviet Union reign, if you criticize Stalin, you're probably going to end up in a gulag.
Okay.
One in three people in the Soviet Union were government informants. So they were keeping watch over other people to make sure they weren't saying anything bad.
Okay.
That means if you had a family of 5 people, there's a pretty good likelihood that one of your family members is working with the government. And the party is paramount over to your own family. So that means even if you're at home speaking at the dinner table, you would still get sent to the gulag.
But guess what, Gabe?
That's a massive restriction on freedom of speech.
What? It happens in America too. Do you know who Fred Hampton Jr. is?
No.
He was a Black Panther, and he was 20 years old when he was murdered. by the FBI because he was criticizing the American government and organizing an independent community that was free of the, in his words, oppressive restrictions of the American government on his community. Now, does that sound like a free speech country where criticizing the American government gets you murdered when you're 20 years old?
You can say that with perfect. You can say that perfectly. That
So
you can say,
Gabe,
but here's the thing.
It's a scale. Do you understand? Like the Soviet Union could have been worse. The Soviet Union could have said, if you criticize anybody, you are gonna die, right? Now that's more extreme than getting sent to the gulag for criticizing Stalin. Is that true? Like any dissent equals execution. That's not how extreme the Soviet Union was, right? So even them, and even with the 1 in 3 government informants, and even with the Paramount Party, right? They were not on the far end of the spectrum when it comes to free speech. Do you understand what I'm saying, Gabe?
Wait,
is that
Eric? The
Yeah.
Soviet Union was probably the farthest on the spectrum.
But I'm
of freedom
saying
of
they could have
speech.
been worse, no? They could have been
Sure,
worse.
by opening. Okay, the worst. So let's put a hypothetical worst. Real quick.
The
What's a hypothetical worst? You open your mouth and you die.
Exactly. Well, not necessarily. If you say anything that is not allowed, right? Let's say you have 6 sentences that you're allowed to say. Good morning. How are you doing? Thank you. I love the leader. Good night. Right? That's it. Right? And if you say anything other than that, you get executed immediately. Right? That's the most extreme version. Right? But that's possible. Human society has the ability, has the logistical capacity to enact something like that. And the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia looked a lot more like that than the Soviet Union did.
Okay, let me try and understand your perspective. Let me try and understand your perspective.
Try to understand what I'm saying, right? Like,
so
I'm not defending the Soviet Union. I'm not saying that that's ideal.
No,
I'm just
I
saying
know
it's a
you're
lot
not.
more nuanced. And I think that by upholding America as this paragon of free speech,
It's not true.
You're mischaracterizing
No, I
what
know
free speech
that.
means,
I know
right?
that. The FBI silences people all the time.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
still doing it.
And
look,
I'm afraid to criticize the CIA. That
Obviously.
means that I am facing the same pressure that a Chinese person feels when they're scared to criticize the CCP. What's the difference?
It's not the
It's
same.
not as extreme.
It's not
as
as
extreme. And I can say, hey, the CIA sucks, right? I'm not afraid to say that, right? But ultimately, I face the same pressure that the person in China faces when they're afraid of criticizing the CCP, or a Russian that's afraid of criticizing Stalin. Like, do you understand how there's different degrees to a freedom of speech?
Let me try
and
and understand- let me try and-
ultimately, max freedom of speech isn't the best way. Like, it's not the ideal
Well, we've
society.
never had max freedom of speech.
Slab City. You can say anything you want in Slab City with no legal repercussions at all.
Yeah,
Yet-
but there's still social pressure there.
Absolutely. And so let's make it even more extreme, that you can literally say anything you want and nobody's allowed to enact any consequences on you. Like, you're allowed to literally go up to somebody and say, I'm going to kill you tonight. Here's my gun. And they're not allowed to do anything about it. Not even allowed to leave town. I mean, that would be the extreme version of anti-free speech, is completely eliminating the ability for people to face consequences for their speech,
all right.
right?
I mean,
both sides are terrible.
Yes,
There's a balance that needs to be found, and by not understanding that we are somewhere on a scale, you're gonna end up making, like, kind of, I don't want to say false arguments, but like,
Okay, I'll
Unproductive
stop
arguments.
straw manning your perspective. Let's try and stop straw manning my perspective.
Yeah.
Let me try and understand your perspective. I'm gonna try and make what I.
so fucking sweaty.
It's so hot.
It's so hot
It's so
here.
hot in here. We got these cold drinks, but they're not doing enough. All right. Let me try and understand your perspective. You're imagining a spectrum of free speech. That on one end, let's put the 2 poles and we'll try and figure out the middle.
Yeah.
So on the far, we could just say left side of the pole is.
Well, so let me start by adding one thing, right? That might be foundational, right? Is that our society is built upon lots of things that allows it to function, right? And there's lots of human traits and things that we do that are necessary in that ability to live in a society, right? And the ability to self-regulate that society is a critical part in society, right? That without the ability to enforce social norms, our societies would look radically different, and that every society on Earth enforces social norms whether you like it or not, and
Yeah.
that's the way that's a factor, and the only discussion is whether or not, or to what extent we should have that factor be centralized, like a government doing it, or whether it should be decentralized, like people on Twitter doing it, whether it should be allowed, whether it should be disallowed, right? We can have a discussion about where we fall on that graph. Right?
And I think that's where our disagreement is.
But ultimately, it's there. And it's not that we can't decide whether it's on or off. It's not free speech or not free speech. It's just where we fall on the plane of free speech.
Yeah, I think so.
And you can imagine two axes, right? Like government and non-government, and then authoritarian and non-authoritarian, right?
Libertarian.
Libertarian, exactly.
Yeah. So let me try and understand. Let me just try and reword it so I get a better understanding. You correct me if I'm wrong at any point. So. Imagine there's a spectrum, and on the far left, you can say anything you want without any repercussions, which has never existed, right?
Unless you live by
unless you live in a mountain.
Yeah,
but even is that even free speech at that point? Because you're not speaking to anyone.
No, I think that's an important thing to note is that society and a restriction on speech are tied together. Like they go hand in hand. Like if you live in a society, you will have constraints on your speech. Period.
I can't.
That is a fact. Unless you live by yourself,
say I have a bomb.
Yeah, and you can't. Even if you just live with your wife and your two children, you can't say certain things, right? And you face the constraints of the consequences of your actions. Even if it's just your children being grumpy at you and not giving you a hug when you come home from work, right? Even in that little society of 4 people, there are consequences to your speech and consequences to your actions. And without those, even that small society of 4 people could not function, right? People could not live with each other if they don't, find some consensus of how to live and how to act amongst each other.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very good. That's a very good point. So, and on the far right end of the spectrum, we could say that, well, it's more of an up and down that we're talking about, authoritarian and libertarian, but it's not necessarily economic.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we'll just say it's on the far left, far right. Yeah. So far left, you could say is, the say whatever you want. You live by yourself. No repercussions. On the far end of the spectrum, we've somewhat seen it in the Soviet Union and China, although it's not the furthest end, like you were telling me.
And Nazi Germany, and
yes, and fascist,
and Japan, and in
couldn't criticize.
We can talk about plenty of dictatorship. I mean,
absolutely.
Saddam Hussein's, Iraq wasn't great. The Islamic Republic of Iran is not great. Saudi Arabia is not great, actually.
Sure.
Eritrea. There's plenty of examples.
Tons. But I mean, kind of the classical example is just USSR.
Right. For the right, and then the left says Nazi Germany.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Those are the easy. Straw
It should
men.
be flipped over.
What do you mean? That
well,
you're criticizing
the far right
your own side? Yeah. That's how it should be, but it's easier to point fingers and blame than say that, repression of free speech is a fascist thing. That's what the liberals say, and then the conservatives say, no, it's a communist thing, right? Yeah. It's easy to point fingers. But in reality,
both. It's both.
It's a human thing.
Yeah. But I think our disagreement is where the hell does the cancel culture actually fall on that spectrum? And should it be allowed? I think that's where we're disagreeing. I think cancel culture has good intentions, right? Its intention is we should stop people from being verbally abused, right? That old man in the whatever at a restaurant yelling at a Latino woman speaking on the phone in Spanish. He should not be yelling at her. That's her right to speak to her mother in Spanish. It's not that guy.
And we don't want that kind of action in our society. Like not just that, like, it's hurting someone. Obviously that's the main factor, but it's like more generally, we don't want to see that, and we don't want that to be anywhere near us, and we don't want to have anything to do with that, right? We hate that, and therefore we don't want you to do that, and we want nobody else to do that. And the only way we know how to do that is because find you on Twitter and
sure.
shout out your employer till you get fired.
And here, and this is what I'm worried about. So there are the only way that certain studies, mathematics, science, philosophy, the only way that those subjects develop is through the discussion of ideas, right? And all ideas are open, and that they are ready to be tested, ready to be proven true or false, and whether or not they get put into the actual, subject itself is under scrutiny, and everyone has to take a look at it and say this is either true or this is either false. But they still get to discuss those ideas. And that's how, mathematics develops. You can't develop mathematics if you're not talking to the person. There's no discussion of ideas. What I'm fearful of cancel culture is I feel that it's a slippery slope. Once you say that this subject is taboo and it can't be talked about, then it's not open to scrutiny. It's not open to be, figured out if it's good or bad to have, right? And it can go south very quickly by saying, "Oh, well, I don't like that, and so we should all get rid of that." But maybe that, which we're actually talking about, isn't actually that bad.
Yeah, and I agree with you that everything should be discussed. Everything is up for debate, and anyone that tells you otherwise is pulling the wool over your eyes and furthering their own agenda. But let me finish
up. Let me put a bow on it.
Yeah.
Let me put a bow on it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that people should be racist. I'm not saying that.
No, I understand.
I'm also not saying that people who like Chris D'Elia, who's Snapchatting those 14-year-old girls or whatever. That's a good thing. It's obviously a bad.
It's a bad thing, and nobody should do that.
No one should do that.
From doing
no
it.
one should do that. I'm not. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm
Okay.
talking about instead is this cancel culture broadening to anyone who has a different opinion than I do should be fired. Right? That's what I'm worried about. And that's the type of slope that happened in the Soviet Union and in China.
All right, let's I'm gonna start a stipulation before I respond, right? No more Soviet Union and China comparisons.
Well, I think they're pretty good. I think they're pretty good
because
example.
neither of us have been to the Soviet Union. Neither of us have experienced censorship from either of those. Although I guess I have experienced censorship from the Chinese government, but we're not Russian and we're not Chinese. We haven't experienced that firsthand. Let's just talk about America.
Wait.
Hey. We're just talking about America right now. We're just talking about American cancel culture, American celebrities, and the American discussions that are happening right now. So I feel
But that's not a good premise because you look around the world
because,
to see.
because Gabe, I think that it's too easy to strawman using those examples. It's too easy to say, well, that's Stalin and that's like Mao, and instead of jumping to those easy examples, and I'll stop using examples of Slab City and stuff that I feel like are strawmen. I think that instead of just like pointing and like saying like it's like that, it'll be. I don't know. I feel like it'd be better for the discussion if instead of having to point to an example, we have to like describe what's actually the same. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah.
So
I'll
like instead
try
of having
it,
to say
but-
like well that's like the Soviet Union. I would say like that is the government is using its police force and its legislative system to regulate and enforce that regulation. What people can and cannot say. Now that's what the Soviet Union did, but I'm not just pointing to the Soviet Union and saying like that. You know what I mean? I feel like it's a little bit more.
Yeah, I just think it's a good example. But
there's so many governments repress all the time. Like the Pinochet government threw people out of helicopters if they criticized Pinochet. Like there's plenty of examples of repressive governments that silence the voices of their people. I just think that it'll be more constructive if we just talk about either what we know or what we can come up with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'll try it.
Because and also it's because I'm not an expert on censorship in the Soviet Union or censorship in China.
Neither am I. I've just read
so
a
I
few
feel
books
like
about it.
if we base our conversation on what the Soviet Union looked like, it's not going to be as good a discussion as what will America look like if this happens. Kind of right? Kind of makes sense?
Yeah, fair enough.
I just want to we got to laser focus on this one thing because otherwise we'll start talking about Khrushchev and then we'll start talking about Gorbachev and the housing reforms in the 1980s in Russia. We'll just rabbit hole. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I don't know. Now we've ended up rabbit holing talking about this.
For the sake of continuing the discussion, I'll stop using the Soviet Union and
All right. So
China. Can
I
I
forgot,
pause this real
I forgot
quick?
what you said. Yeah.
I think I want to pause. I just need to hit the restroom.
Yeah, let's get drinks.
Yeah, we'll be right back. So we're back.
We're back.
No time passed for you guys, but time passed for us. Let's start with
Slippery slope of cancel culture.
exactly. So it is a slippery slope. So I feel that when you have certain things that are taboo to speak about, that's always a bad thing. And cancel culture limits what people can actually talk about. And I'm not talking necessarily about when a person makes a racist comment or sexually harasses someone or something like that. Those people obviously should feel social pressure and face justice for what they did. That's bad. What I am talking about is how there are certain things that can become taboo to speak about if cancel culture is left to play out as it will play out. And as I'm seeing it unfold, there's going to be certain, using cancel culture to people's advantage, such as this person has a different political opinion than me, and that is wrong, right? Alex Jones, and I'm not trying to justify Alex Jones. He got kicked off of multiple platforms for his way of speaking. And there's reasons for it.
People on the left as well.
People on the left as
Hassan
well.
Abi, he got kicked off of FX. He had a show on FX, and he got kicked off because he said that America deserved 9/11. It happens all over the place.
It does.
Right? Now, maybe that shouldn't be taboo. Maybe we should really start to talk about whether we deserve 9/11 or not. But I just want to preface that this is not like people that criticize cancel culture are often on the right and characterize it as this leftist thing, and it's just leftists engaging in it.
It happens on both
I just
sides.
want to say that conservatives are the original masters of cancel culture, and they've actually been engaging in cancel culture on the internet, especially long before leftists began engaging in that same practice.
Yes. So back on to Alex Jones. One of the reasons that Alex Jones got kicked off is because he said Sandy Hook was staged. And that was pretty awful. That was a pretty bad thing to say.
Yeah.
And but did he deserve to be kicked off of the platform and to have his opinions suppressed? And he still has Infowars.com. And trust me, I look at Alex Jones as if he was an animal in the zoo.
Yeah.
I like to look at him and admire.
He's an entertainer.
Yeah.
He's not a thinker. He's certainly not a political thinker. He's the equivalent of like Stephen Colbert's character on the Colbert Report. He was the uber right guy and almost cartoonishly conservative.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what
That's
I think
Alex.
of him. That's Alex Jones.
But did he deserve to be kicked off of all these platforms and not have his voice heard? I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah.
He's
Well,
a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
And conspiracy theorists they get it wrong.
Yeah. Well, so let me. I don't know. Can I? Do you feel like you got anything else? Do you want to add? Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
So I didn't really build my argument. I just kind of went straight to Alex Jones.
Yeah. But you can't talk about cancel culture without mentioning Alex Jones at least once, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
The man is
Jones,
synonymous with
Cancel culture.
anti-cancel culture. You know?
Yeah. But so if I was to try and convince someone that they shouldn't believe in cancel culture, I would just say you have to be careful with how you apply social pressure, because it can lead to something that isn't beneficial for the people in general. It is beneficial if a person makes racist comments just to try and get them fired from the job so that they don't hurt more people. That is efficacious, but it isn't when you have a person who have a dissenting opinion than you and you say canceled. And
I totally understand that.
and I the way that I see the cancel culture progressing is toward that.
Yeah. Well, so first I got two little things that that are detailed responses, and then I'll give my broader response. Right. The first is that when some subjects become taboo, it's actually better. Like social Darwinism. I know this is a subject that we've talked about, but like race science, I think it's a good thing that it's no longer an acceptable scientific position. And if you believe in it and you try to present yourself as a reputable scientist, you will get you'll get laughed out of the scientific community, right? And it's taboo, and sure, there might be a couple scientists that have some race science thoughts, and if they felt comfortable expressing them, they would. I personally believe that the fact that that's taboo is a good thing. I think that ultimately race science as a ideology and as a thing that was debated and discussed caused a lot of harm to people of color and colonized people as a whole. And I think that ultimately the sooner we got rid of it and the faster it became taboo, the less people it could hurt. And I think that that was a good example of society saying, hey, that's not okay. And it's not okay to even flirt with the idea, right? And sure, it's absolute, and it might miss a couple of little details that might contribute to that sort of thinking. But guess what? Acknowledging those details isn't worth the pain and suffering caused by that ideology and the people promoting that ideology.
Yeah, and if I can interpose real quick. I don't want to mess up your argument here. The Catholic Church believes that too. The Catholic Church had a set of books that you couldn't read. It was I can't remember the time period, but there were a list of banned books because the ideas themselves that were in the books were more dangerous than to be discussed. They're too dangerous to be discussed.
Yeah. Now, I'm like.
So that is an example.
I'm not fully over there. Like I think that like personally and between people, like nothing is off limits, and that anything like as long as it's a consensual discussion, right? As long as you're not like trapping someone in a corner and like, hey, let me tell you about race science, right? Like as long as that's not what's happening, like you should feel free to discuss whatever you feel comfortable discussing. But ultimately, removing that dialogue from society as a whole was good and was a good thing. So as long as stopping people from saying things publicly and expressing those opinions publicly, I think is different than like individually discussing them. No, but it's not a big issue, and that's not my main point, right?
Sure. But that is a good point about the social Darwinism. That's true.
Second thing is that YouTube is a private company, and in such they have the ability and the right to regulate who uses their platform, and it's up to themselves to decide how they regulate it and come up with their own community guidelines. And I often, find this hypocritical that people on the right are often so gung-ho about, quote unquote free speech and, business owners' ability to run their business how they want, right? Like the baker that refused to bake a cake for a gay couple in Colorado, right? That was a big issue, and people on the right generally supported the baker and his right to refuse service. Yet, when it comes to free speech, and the Alex Jones issue specifically of him getting banned from YouTube, to me that's just an extension of the fact that YouTube is a private business who has a right to run its business how it wants. And guess what? YouTube thinks it will make more money if it bans Alex Jones, and they have the right to do that under the current system. So unless you believe, the sort of the unspoken follow-up to Alex Jones should never be banned from YouTube no matter what he says, because he's just a conspiracy theorist and he should have the freedom to express himself on this platform, would be a step towards, in my opinion, restricting free speech, because YouTube, as a private company with competitors who has the ability to decide who says what on its platform that it created and it allows people to use, once you strip that ability away from them, now all of a sudden you're actually deciding what YouTube decides, and you're extending government intervention into an area where it otherwise was not. And guess what? The thing is, YouTube is not a monopoly, right? And Alex Jones videos are still on Vimeo, and they're on LiveLeak, and they're on a million other competitors to YouTube. And so to sort of put forth this idea that, and I know this isn't what you were doing, but this is the way some people have characterized it, is that it's like, the government trying to stamp out Alex Jones because he's, anti them. Like, no, Alex Jones is all over the place. I can see him everywhere, right? Even though he's not on YouTube. And this sort of transitions into my next point, which is that, especially in the arena of political debate, as long as somebody has a audience, they have the ability to engage in that debate. So right now, a lot of people are saying the left is taking over society and you're not allowed to talk about all this stuff, right? And everything is taboo, like especially around like race and police and all these hot topics that are being discussed right now. But the thing is, there are a ton of people that publicly state to an audience that they are vehemently against these things and that they disagree with those positions. And guess what? They're on YouTube, they're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, right? I can name them right. Tommy Lauren, right? Lauren Summer, all these, Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, right? I can name more of right-wing people that express their opinions on the internet than I can leftists, right? So to say that the left is sort of wiping out free speech and that all these political topics are going to be taboo, I think is really a way of those right-wing voices of firing up their base and getting them more fired up to be on the offensive. Because if they feel like they're being attacked and you're not allowed to be able to say anything, and you can't express yourself at work, and before you know it, in 5 years you can't say anything, and then we're in the Soviet Union. Those people are scared, and guess what? Having a scared audience means they're much more willing to do crazy things like buy Alex Jones brain pills or you know, donate to Ben Shapiro's Patreon, right? Like, I don't know. I'm sort of you know, focusing on a specific instance, right? But more generally, I feel like, to your point that certain areas within political debate are becoming taboo, I don't think they are. To me, I see a variety of opinions on the internet, and I see that even people with super niche opinions are able to find an audience and are able to engage in the discussion that is happening all across our world. And that's actually improved over the last 40 years. You know, if you look at the opinions that you were able to receive from a person that you didn't know or interact with face to face, they were just the news, and you had 4 channels to choose from. And if an opinion wasn't expressed in the news or in the newspaper or in a book that you were able to buy, you didn't have access to that opinion. Now, all of a sudden, anybody with a camera and an internet connection can go onto the internet and express themselves. Where the issue arises is people who make their money not from politics, but the public as a whole, right? And now this is where cancel culture begins to affect people, right? So I just said that you know, the people that complain the loudest about cancel culture are actually unaffected by it because their platform is based on you know, peddling to an audience that automatically doesn't like cancel culture. And if cancel culture tries to cancel Alex Jones, guess what? Alex Jones's audience isn't going to feel bad about it because they already don't like cancel culture and they agree with Alex Jones, right? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense.
That there's still room for political debate because the only qualifier...
Because of the internet, really.
Because of the internet and the fact that the only thing you need to debate that and even to, you know, for that to become your career is people that agree with you. And I think that there's still plenty of people that have varying perspectives on ideas, on debates, on things like Black Lives Matter, on things like gun control, on all these issues that people feel like are being, you know, shut down and taboo and not being talked about anymore. And the only time when that would actually come into effect, where people aren't allowed to talk about it anymore, is if there's no audience, right? Like right now, there's not an audience for social Darwinism, right? So you don't have any big social Darwinist YouTubers. If there was, like if there was still 30% of the population that believed there was evolutionary differences between races and that those differences led to a hierarchy of races, then you would have big public figures that represented that opinion, right? Like you have figures like, you know, Jordan Peterson, who peddles mostly to, you know, traditionalist conservatives, right? And he is able to make a great living simply by peddling that perspective, right? So he's not only been not shut down and not censored, he has been able to make a lot of money doing that, right? So now the issue comes to people that make their money not from political audiences listening to them, but people that make money from the public as a whole. Right, so that's people like actors, people like you know, business leaders, people like you know, the CEOs of tech companies or politicians, people like that, right, that make their money and whose job is reliant not on a specific group of people that have a specific perspective, but on the public as a whole. And so if those people say something that the public as a whole disagrees with, that's when cancel culture begins to kick in, right? And so when that person whose job is selling things to America or the world as a whole, once they say something that most people disagree with, that's when cancel culture begins to kick in. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense.
And so it's not necessarily that like, and the thing is like, you know, the issues that people are being canceled on it's a pretty short list, right? Like it's issues like race, it's issues like women's rights, it's issues like you know, sexual assault and rape and that sort of thing. And it's not about math. It's not about physics. No physicist has been canceled because they, you know, said something taboo in physics, right? It's constrained to a very small portion of our nation's dialogue, and the rest of the world is relatively unaffected unless they sort of, and I know this is going to sound wrong, but step out of their lane, right? So if a physicist says some crazy stuff about race, yeah, they might get canceled because their job is not to talk to people about race, it's to talk to people about physics. And when they choose to take that different position, they have just pissed off a lot of people that are usually part of their audience and usually agree with them, but now all of a sudden don't. It's the same way. Yeah. It's the same way you can have flat Earth YouTubers and you can have flat Earth celebrities, but when a rapper starts to become a flat Earther, that can lead to career problems for them. When for a flat Earth YouTuber, that can be their entire career. It's because the audiences are different and the way the audience reacts to their statements will be different.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So
That does make sense.
it depends
Yeah.
on your audience, right? So yeah, if the Royal Society of Mathematicians, doesn't care about canceling other mathematicians for saying radical stuff, then you're not going to see it happen, right? But if the general populace cares that the CEO of Pizza Hut is going on a racist tirade on Twitter, then that person is going to face those consequences. So it really depends on who your audience is, what do they care about, and what is your role in their eyes, right?
Yeah, but
if you're a Republican politician and you're talking about how Black Lives Matter protesters are undermining American civilization, your audience is probably going to like that, right? And they're probably going to agree with you, and you're not going to face consequences because of that. But if you're a Hollywood celebrity, right, whose main role is starring in Marvel movies, if you say the same thing, America as a whole might not like you. And even though half of America might, you're still going to get a lot more backlash because you're stepping out of your lane. You're an actor that's saying something that people don't agree with, right? And people are reacting to that, right? And you see this from the right all the time. When Chris Evans tweets something that's anti-Trump, people go onto Twitter and try to cancel him, right? They just don't do it successfully, right? It happens on both sides. The issue is that once that criticism reaches a critical mass, it can have a real effect. And it's only once that person has pissed off enough people that it begins to take real effect.
Yeah, I'm kind of realizing this as we're talking about this. My opinion on this is pretty much worthless because either way, it's going to exist, right? Because there's no way that I can take away everyone's smartphones, take away everyone's Twitters and Facebooks. Like it's an inevitable process. These people have the ability. There's no way they're going to get rid of that ability.
And it's not a new thing. Like I think that's another big problem I have with it is that people are acting like the world is changing and like, oh my God, like the tables are turning and our society is going to become unrecognizable because people are getting fired from their jobs because of people on Twitter. And what I want to reiterate is that we've done this for the entirety of human history. We've canceled people,
but never on this large of a scale.
Well, no, it's just that people weren't like Marie Antoinette. One could say that she got canceled. Now it was very different. She got her head cut off by a guillotine, but ultimately that process was the same as Morgan Freeman getting Me Too'd, right? I mean, different. Morgan Freeman still has a head, and Marie Antoinette does not.
Was it Morgan Freeman or was it Bill Cosby? Is that what you're talking about?
There's plenty of people that got Me Too'd. I mean, Morgan Freeman had some accusations, but Bill Cosby's were even worse, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that it's the same thing we've been doing. Like I know I'm repeating my point here, but like it's not a new thing. It's just being done in a different way at a different scale.
And the process can't be stopped either.
It's always happened, and it's not something that one side of the country is guilty of. Everybody's doing it. Everybody's doing it to benefit their own personal ideology. And guess what? If you don't like it, you can hop on the internet and talk about it.
Well, and
that's the thing is like cancel culture, like people are talking about it as if it's become this homogenous, tyrant that's ruling America, and all the celebrities like Joe Rogan and all these podcasts, they're so scared of it. Like, no, the fact that you're still able to go on your podcast and talk about it and criticize it means that this specter that you're afraid of isn't there. It's a ghost that you're pulling out of thin air, and ultimately, you're just dealing with the same thing that people in positions of authority have always dealt with, which is criticism and the consequences of that criticism.
Yeah.
Like, sorry, Joe Rogan. Like, yeah, guess what? Like, as a person who has a massive audience, if you say stuff that most of America doesn't agree with, you're gonna face consequences for it. And I know that can feel terrible. And I'm we have a podcast right here, and I know it would feel terrible to get canceled for something I said, and I would feel like, oh, that was just a dumb little mark. Why do I have to have my stuff ruined for this? But I don't know. We just gotta take a broader perspective and really realize that like this is not a new thing. This is just our society's way of filling that function with the internet.
Yeah, I think what the real debate is whether or not it's justified in canceling or not justified.
Yeah, well,
and that varies from person to person. Like with Chris D'Elia, with him talking to 14-year-old, underage women, and like
nobody stuck up for him. Like there was almost, probably somebody on Twitter, but like almost nobody was out there fighting for the guy. But that process, right?
It varies
we
from
as a society have to decide ourselves. And if we decide, hey, guess what? Bill Cosby roofing all those women is terrible. And we don't want anyone ever to do that ever again. And we're going to use our power to ensure that happens. He's going to get canceled way harder, right? And if there is a debate, that means that there isn't a consensus, right? So I feel like, I don't know, it's not really that bad. And like, if it's not a big problem, like Ellen tweeted that, being stuck at quarantine was like being stuck in jail. And people were like, that's disrespectful to the people that are actually in jail because you're not, sympathizing with their struggle. Did Ellen get canceled for that? No. Ellen still has the Ellen Show. She still has advertisers because it was a really small portion of the population that was angry enough at Ellen and was willing to cancel her. Make sense, right?
Like, yeah, but again, I think it goes back to it varies per case, and if someone gets canceled,
and
that
we
doesn't
decide
deserve to
per case is what I'm saying. Is that us as a society, the people on Twitter, we're discussing it, and it may not seem like we're having like a constructive, organized discussion, but that's what's happening. When
I don't
think
it's people, I think there's a real hive mind mentality to it, especially to Twitter.
So why do some people do things that some people think they should get canceled for, but they don't? Why does that, how could that case happen if Twitter was really such a hive mind as soon as one person says, let's cancel them, everybody else joins in? Then wouldn't every single person that has even the smallest accusation or the smallest thing for canceling them get canceled? Ellen would be canceled. I don't know. I feel like...
First off, you got to ask yourself, is it in the power of these people to actually cancel people?
Absolutely, because we've seen it happen time and time again. It's happened, right? That's why we're even talking about this.
But again, it varies per case. Like the reason why Ellen didn't get canceled is because it wasn't that terrible of a comment.
Right, exactly. And so do you understand how we kind of decided that? Like you decided that individually when you just heard it, right? And some people had a differing opinion and they went on the internet to express that opinion. But not enough people agreed with them and more people agreed with you. So nothing happened. But if 90% of America was like, yeah, that is screwed up. Ellen should not have a job for saying that quarantine is like being in jail. Then Ellen would not have a job.
And then would you agree with that?
Would I agree with that? What do you mean?
Would you agree with that?
No,
that Ellen
I would be in the 10%. I would be in the 10%. But ultimately, that's how it works. You know what I mean? Like we are discussing it, and it may not seem like that, but if 90% of America decide something, then there are consequences to it.
But that's kind of a bad premise, right? Because the majority can be wrong, right?
Absolutely. But are you saying that I don't think that any individual is more right than the majority of people. Like the alternative to allowing the American people to decide is allowing a smaller group of people. And I feel like that is just moving in the wrong direction. Like I don't want to have a state council on censorship that decides Ellen gets canceled, Zach Galifianakis doesn't get canceled, Morgan Freeman doesn't, but Bill Cosby does. That's even worse. That's even closer in the direction of restricting and shutting stuff down. Basically, what I'm trying to sort of come to and sum up is that when people get canceled that you don't agree with them being canceled, that means that you're in the minority of the opinion. And when people don't get canceled when you believe they should, then you're also in the minority. But when you believe that the right thing happened, like you think about Chris D'Elia, you think that he was right to get canceled, but maybe you think that Sean Hannity shouldn't get canceled for this other thing he said. Then you're engaging in that discussion and you're a part of the percent. It just sometimes you're going to disagree with it and sometimes you're not. And like that's the thing about being part of making a decision is that sometimes you're going to agree with it and sometimes you're not. So I think that people on both sides should stop seeing things in such absolute terms of, oh, they're coming for us all, and everybody's gonna get banned, and no one's gonna be able to say anything, because it's easy to fall into that trap when you look at like all these people that got banned that I agree with. It's easy to fall into that trap, but instead you got to take a step back and say, people on both sides are facing consequences when they do something, right? And sometimes I'm agree with it, and sometimes I'm not. And the same way I agree with some things that America does as a whole, and sometimes I don't agree with it.
This is a lot more complicated of an issue than I thought it was.
Yeah, it's super complicated.
This is super complicated,
yeah.
and again, I think it varies per case.
And that's exactly the point. Is that we all have the power to decide per case. And if it's in the national discussion, then the nation is going to decide per case. There's no laws that say if you say this, you'll go to jail. It's once again, it's exactly like that. It's decided upon per case the way it is right now.
But again, I'm a little bit of me is skeptical about the ability of the majority to decide, because sometimes the majority can be wrong. Right? The majority can make the wrong decision.
Absolutely.
And if they make the wrong decision, then the person who suffers is the person who got canceled.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I don't
but
think
what's
that's...
the alternative?
Well, it doesn't matter the alternative.
No, it absolutely does.
Well, it
Gabe.
doesn't matter the alternative
because if the alternative is worse, then we got to stick with what we have right now.
But the alternative doesn't matter because it isn't even in the power to entertain the alternative.
Well, yeah, us right now, we have no power to do anything. But I'm just saying, for the sake of discussion, is there any way we could make this system work better by not having the majority decide? Because you're right, the majority chooses wrong all the time. You know, we had slavery for nearly 200 years, and people were fine with, like, a majority of the American people said, yeah, I'm cool with that. Owning people, right? That is reprehensible and disgusting. And the fact that the majority believe that is a clear example of how the majority can be wrong. But I can't think of a better alternative. So my perspective is that's the way it is. And because there isn't a better alternative, I'm not going to fight to change it, right? I don't think that people are going to fight to change something that they can't imagine as better, right?
Yeah, I mean, you got to have a goal in mind if you're going to
and
change anything.
So if you believe that, like, you know, letting the majority decide these things is wrong, I feel like you got to have an alternative in your mind at least. Maybe it's the Catholic clergy deciding. No, I'm serious. Like, you know, I have some crazy illogical, you know, visions of America sometimes that when I take a hard look at it, I'm like, oh no, that's crazy. That's just me being, you know, romantic and romanticizing. I don't know. So I feel like, you know, if there...
Honestly, it's way too complicated of an issue for me to actually make any sense. Yeah. Like, I haven't thought about it that much.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the only thing that
I guess that's my critique more generally. That, yeah, Joe Rogan, if you don't like cancel culture, first analyze it accurately and then come up with an alternative that would work better for everybody. And if you're able to convince people of a better alternative, guess what? We'll adopt it. You know, like the doors are still open. You know, this has not been enshrined in law. This is not legislation. This is just the way we do things. And if you come up with a better way of doing things, I'm not saying you in particular. I'm saying you as in you, an American, you have the power and the ability and the opportunity to say something about it. And maybe you are the one that can come up with a better system than cancel culture.
Yeah, and also you have to consider too that the people who are actually doing the canceling are not the majority of the population. Like we can't equivocate those two things.
Well, don't
the
you
people
think
who
that
use Twitter and the people who use the social media are mostly young people, first off, and people who actually genuinely care about the topic, which is also also very specific.
I'll bring up a counterexample of Colin Kaepernick. I feel like Colin Kaepernick was canceled by old white people on Facebook, and to say he wasn't canceled, I feel like is completely mischaracterizing what, because can we describe what happened? Is he got put on the bench, right, for the rest of the season, and he hasn't gotten hired as a quarterback despite him being better statistically than many other of the quarterbacks in the league.
I think he just got hired.
Okay, but he spent how many years now?
I think he got kicked out in 2016,
years?
right?
Right, yeah, 4 or 5 years of.
He was actually a really good quarterback too.
He was amazing, really right? Good. And to me, his statement was totally acceptable, right? I was in the portion of the population that agreed with Colin Kaepernick. I do think that the American flag represents a systematically racist country, right? And I am cautious in praising that country because it continues to be racist, right? I completely agree with him. And the thing is, a lot of Americans didn't, and they went onto Facebook and they went onto their group chats and they expressed themselves enough that the NFL took action, right? So I don't know, like I don't even know why I brought Colin Kaepernick up. I'm so hot that my brain is just
I feel the exact same way. Yeah, so apparently Colin Kaepernick got, I think, re-signed with the 49ers, but
he lost the peak of his career. I mean, he could have been a legendary quarterback if given the opportunity, but instead he suffered the consequences of expressing himself. I mean, we're talking about how, the people who get canceled are the victims, right? Colin Kaepernick is a victim of trying to express himself, right? He has that ability, he has that freedom, he has that opportunity, yet he suffered those consequences. And I believe that he shouldn't have, but many other people do, and that's the way the world works, right? And so instead of trying to shut down that whole system, I just want to try to give a more accurate representation of what cancel culture is. It's just an extension of what we've been doing for our entire history.
Yeah.
And it sucks.
All
we can
human
always
history, not just American.
And we're all going to disagree with certain people that get canceled, but that's just a part of allowing the majority and the populace as a whole to decide things. Is that sometimes
but
we
you're
disagree
equating the
with
populace
majority.
as a whole with people who actually do the canceling.
Right.
This
So-
is
so-
not the population
Yeah,
as
I
a
mean,
whole.
I mean,
It's a minority.
So it's just. I mean, let's try to qualify it then.
Okay, so
Right?
the people who
Like-
are doing the majority of the canceling seem to be people who are on the left.
Or young people.
Okay, well, young people are mostly on the left anyways.
Exactly. So one can say one or the other.
Sure,
right?
but-
but by saying the left, you're implying that it's people on the right getting canceled as opposed to old people getting canceled.
Well,
which
of course.
which it would be if you say it's young people doing the canceling. Then the implication is that it's old people getting canceled, right? So I think it's an important distinction to draw.
Sure, but would you agree with the people who are doing the most canceling are
No.
the people on the left?
No.
You wouldn't agree with that?
Absolutely.
Why not?
Because Fox News cancels people all the time. The right cancels people all the time. We just talked about how old Facebook moms canceled someone, and it happens just as frequently. You might not be as tuned into it because
I'm not on
because,
Twitter. I'm not on social media.
I mean, no, I know, but like when you hear in the zeitgeist that someone has lost their position of authority due to something they did, I think that I'm more tuned into people on the left getting canceled because I'm enraged by that and will focus more attention on that. Like I spend a lot more time thinking about how Colin Kaepernick's been canceled because I disagree with it than I do about let me think of a person. Crystalia getting canceled. I don't think about that because I agree with it. I'm like, yeah, that's the way it should have been. On to the next thing, right? Colin Kaepernick, I think about that all the damn time, right? Because it's unjust and I disagree with it. So I think that.
But again, that just goes to the
have
majority point of yours, which is the majority decided, and you have to accept that, right?
And I'm okay with that. I recognize that that's the way it works, and I know that I don't have a better way of running things, and I certainly don't have a better proposal for.
So you just have to accept it.
That's the way it is, and I'm not going to fight to change it because there's no change that I can imagine being made that would be better. You know what I mean? So
it's kind of funny that Colin Kaepernick, was looking silly to most people, back 4 years ago, and now he's, I don't know, would you consider him somewhat of a hero, a champion of Black lives?
Absolutely. I mean, he sacrificed his career for the movement. Is that honorable or to me, just like base morality, especially Christian morality, like.
He's a martyr.
Acted as a martyr. I mean, and I know it can seem ridiculous compared to people that actually died, but dude, he lost a ton of money because Americans got upset that he was kneeling for the flag, which he and I think this is an important thing to qualify. Originally, he would not stand up. He would remain on the bench and keep sitting down for the national anthem. However, he had a discussion with a Marine veteran, and the Marine veteran talked about how they kneel in remembrance and in reverence for their fallen brothers and sisters, right? So when Marines kneel, it's a sign of respect for the dead, right? And that's what they talked about. So instead of sitting down, which the Marine felt actually was disrespectful, Colin Kaepernick changed it to kneeling for the flag, which from the perspective of this veteran was actually more respectful than standing up and putting your hand over your heart.
Kneeling in the Catholic Church is a more respectful position than
you
standing.
don't stand up and put your hand over your heart for God. You kneel as a sign of respect and reverence, right? Now, because Colin Kaepernick disobeyed the social norms of everybody has to stand up and put their hand over their heart, which is an arbitrary thing. Can we agree? Like, there's nothing physically or the laws of nature that say that this is a sign of respect.
It's an external, so it changes your mind towards what you're actually focusing on.
Because that's what we believe, right? And
it does. It does. It helps you abstract.
If we believe, if we grew up in a society that this was a sign of disrespect, this was the middle finger, putting your hand over your heart, then doing that during the national anthem would, evoke just as much controversy as remaining sitting. Make sense? But it's not concrete, Gabe. There's nothing in the genome, in nature, in the laws of physics that say that this is a sign of respect.
You're getting into.
I'm talking about social norms.
Sure, but you're getting into a point about how the body affects the spirit, which is.
No, I'm not. Gabe.
Yes,
I'm
you
talking
are.
about social norms, man. That is
it might
it's
seem
a social
disconnected.
norm. It's a social norm to do that, right? Now, could there be some underlying reason why we do that specifically? Yeah, of course. Everything has a reason that it got here, right? But all I'm saying is that looking at the two actions objectively, right? Kneeling and putting your hand over your heart, there is no objective. Neither is objectively more or less disrespectful than the other.
Well,
like seriously.
Again, you're getting into how the body affects the mind.
I'm talking. Okay, now that you might have a particular perspective on that, but can we agree that that's not a truth, right? Like there's no concrete identifiable evidence that shows that one is more respectful than the other.
Okay, for the sake of argument and for the sake of continuing this,
I just want you to say
I
just
know.
give it to me. You know?
I don't want to say yes, but I'll hear this out because there's in the Catholic Church, right? Because we kneel all the time. We kneel in front of the Blessed Eucharist, right?
Yeah, and that's what God says, right? So yeah, one is more disrespectful.
No,
right?
kneeling is a more reverent position than standing.
All right. Yeah, so in that case, all right, I'll jump onto that. So from the Catholic perspective, he was being more reverent than every other player in the NFL. And yet, because Americans had a wrong perspective on that matter, he lost money, lost his career, was trashed, and was ridiculed. He had death threats sent to him. Someone tried to mail him anthrax, right? Like he suffered consequences because he believed in something greater than himself. I don't know. To me, if that's not martyrdom, now it's like the strict definition is you have to die, right?
Yeah,
but
you
like
gotta die.
to me, that's like. The NFL's not going to kill him. That's as close to like getting thrown on a cross in the middle of the field as you can get. Is getting kicked off the team, not getting hired, and getting trashed by
what you've worked for your entire
fans.
life is just swept out from underneath you.
All
Yeah,
because you believe in a better America. Like I don't know. Now we gotten into really specific territory.
Kneeling and
stuff, right? But
and on the heart.
I don't know.
Yeah. You're
I'm
right.
not talked out about on
I think we
subject.
nailed cancel culture.
Fuck
I mean,
yeah.
I don't have a well-formed opinion on it, and I'm not because I don't know enough. I'm not gonna sit here and challenge you on all your takes, but I think your main point is this isn't something that's new.
Yeah.
We've been doing this since the beginning of human history. If someone wasn't picking enough berries, then hey, we're gonna let them know.
Or if someone was talking shit about the rain god. Buddy, we all need that rain.
Yeah.
You better shut up.
Exactly.
Even though, from our perspective, that's completely unimportant. Like,
it
doesn't matter what you say about the rain god because the rain god doesn't
exist. And the Catholic Church used that social pressure as well.
Exactly. Everybody does it. Everybody uses it. It's just that we're so clouded by our own perspectives that we see everything as super absolute. So, kneeling for the flag is like a direct, fuck you to America's veterans. Like that's as absurd as getting mad at someone for yelling at the rain god.
Yeah,
it's just as absurd. It's just as
he's not
clouded by our own perspective and our own experience.
People have to recognize why was he kneeling? The reason he was kneeling is because of police brutality, and it does exist.
Yeah, he wasn't saying I don't like America and American veterans. Like he never said anything about that.
No, he was just saying I'm protesting police brutality.
Although, what's an interesting point that I like to make? So. I always find it interesting that when people on the left, criticize racism in America, the right oftentimes willingly puts itself in the position of being criticized. So instead of saying like for example, if I were to tweet on Twitter, all racists should be fired from their jobs immediately and never hired again, right? Instead of saying, yeah, we believe that, screw racists. People on the right are often they automatically go on the defensive. You know what I mean? And,
because cancel culture is is a charged word, man.
But no, I'm talking specifically about racism, right? And that when people are attacked for racism, or when Colin Kaepernick says that America's a racist country, it's funny that they immediately associate it to things that leftists actually think are racist, right? So when Colin Kaepernick says, I think that America is a racist country and I'm not going to stand up for the flag, the conservative reaction, and I'm strawmanning this too, is you disrespect our troops, right? Which can seem illogical and be like, what are you talking about, troops? Like, I guess, the flag does represent the troops and you're just, I guess so. But if you look at it from a really left-wing perspective, there's sort of an undrawn line that those conservatives are drawing there that are saying, listen, if you're attacking racist institutions in America, you're attacking the military. And by they're subconsciously connecting the two in the same way that leftists do.
Well, they're somewhat connected, right? Because the flag is tied to the American.
But I'm saying that they're implying that when Colin Kaepernick is attacking racist institutions, and he doesn't say the police or the jails, or he did mention police specifically, but he said more broadly that America is a racist country with racist institutions. When he says that. When there's that blank box of a quote-unquote racist institution, the fact that conservatives choose to fill that box with the military is kind of revealing. of how they view the military as a racist institution, because they didn't choose to say, hey, you're disrespecting the people that work at the IRS when you're kneeling for that flag. They're not saying, hey, you're disrespecting the postal workers that serve our country and deliver our mail.
Well, I think
they're
where
specifically
it's-
choosing the military.
Sure. But the reason
which
why
you could say is because the flag's about the military, but the flag represents America.
Well, the
And
flag. Okay, but
and-
there's
and-
people who've died holding that flag, and people who've died, trying to put up the flag, right? So I think,
it's a symbol of America, right?
yeah, like
But- but-
that
but-
famous,
Yeah, and on Iwo Jima, right? But
Iwo Jima,
but the
yeah.
reason those soldiers are doing that is not because they love the American flag. It's because they love America.
Yeah.
Right. And so the flag acts as sort of that connecting factor, right? But as a symbol, it's sort of a blank slot, right? That anybody can view that flag as a symbol of whatever they want. Some people all across the world view it as a symbol of imperialism and drones
Sure,
that come
sure.
and bomb their cities and illegal coup d'etats and
Yeah,
the CIA
yeah.
selling drugs. Like that's what they see when they see the flag. Other people see bald eagles and beautiful rolling
Yeah, I
hills
mean, that's what I see.
and liberating the world and business and innovation. Like we have different perspectives on this symbol, and so by choosing like what we choose to fill in that blank spot of the American flag is representative of sort of our underlying feelings on that issue. So
Yeah.
so when Colin Kaepernick says, I don't like racist institutions in America, he's not saying I don't like the military. But by defending the military in response to that attack, you're implying that Colin Kaepernick was attacking the military, which he wasn't.
no, he was kneeling
Right,
during the
he-
flag, but the flag represents the military in people's minds.
But
Sure.
they're choosing to draw that connection, right? Like they could have said the flag represents the U.S. Postal Service because the Postal Service, incorporates the colors of the flag and stripes, right? That's what I associate with the flag, and so by kneeling against the flag, he's disrespecting the Postal Service. But that's not what
just
they
so
said.
ridiculous. No,
It seems
it's
absurd.
the military.
But they chose to defend the military against an attack against racism. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like when
Yeah.
when he's saying I don't like racist institutions, they said, "Hey, stop attacking the military."
Yeah.
Am I putting it explicitly enough?
Yeah.
That sort of reveals that the underlying opinion or their underlying perspective on the military is that it is a racist institution, yet they still support it and are willing to defend it. Like
How do you equate that it's a racist institution?
okay, because I'm Colin Kaepernick and I say I don't like racist institutions. Or how about this? Let's make it a little bit more personal, right? I go to school and I get a loudspeaker and I say I don't like racists, and anyone that's racist can come up and can fight me, right? And all of a sudden you start defending Dan. You're like, hey, what did Dan do, man? Like that's really disrespectful. Like why are you talking about Dan like that? I'm not talking about Dan. I'm just saying racist, and you chose to fill in that box with Dan. That implies that Dan's a racist. Does that make sense? Like, why else would you, out of all the people to defend, choose to defend Dan?
Okay, I see what you're saying, but I think the answer is a lot more simpler than what you're.
What, is it the flag is the military and the military is the flag?
No, that's not the answer. But that is. Let me just tell you what I'm thinking. So, when, like I said,
because it's the national anthem too, and when I think of the national anthem, I think of sports games, right? And so I could say, hey, by kneeling for the national anthem, you're disrespecting the good sporting institutions of America, just because that's what I associate with the national anthem. Sure, everybody can associate their own thing, but ultimately you are choosing what to fill that box in with.
Yeah,
yourself.
the reason. Okay, so the reason why. So let's just take this step by step, right? Because Colin Kaepernick kneeled during the national anthem and at the flag, and people said, he's disrespecting the military, right? Now, how the hell are those two things related, right? That's your question.
Well, it's because the Department of Defense pays for the national anthem to be played and the flag to be displayed before football
Sure,
games.
but why? But
So it is like looking at it logically, it's an ad for the Department of Defense, and he's disrespecting their ad. So yeah, it makes sense why the military itself would be like, hey, that's not cool.
could it just be
no,
it's not just an ad. Could
no.
people just be proud of their country?
Why would the military pay to unfurl a flag across a football field?
Because
Does
we're
does
protected people.
Does that advance America's national security interests? Because ultimately, that's
Well, what do you mean? How does it advance? Why
would it? Because it instills patriotism and it instills the pride in the nation and the flag.
It's a good thing to
and,
be proud
and
of
the
your
military.
country.
It's but is it for the military to be willing to pay money that could otherwise be spent on planes and boats and missiles, and instead saying, listen, this money is best spent on fomenting what you call, maybe you call it patriotism, maybe you call it nationalism, whatever you want to call it. They've decided that it is in their interest. They did a cost-benefit analysis and say we make more benefit out of spending money and paying sporting organizations to play the national anthem and to display the flag before sporting events. So from that perspective, yeah, it makes sense why the military feels directly attacked, but it's not the military itself. It's not the Army Twitter. It's not, the Secretary of the Navy going out and criticizing Colin Kaepernick. It's lots of individual people drawing that connection themselves
to the military and to
racist institutions. I mean the argument they use is he's disrespecting the flag and he's disrespecting the national anthem. But once again, that's your perspective,
I
right?
think,
what is respect and what is disrespect. But ultimately, my way of looking at it is they're reacting to his statements and his reason for protest. And
I don't think they're reacting to their statement.
Let me qualify it. J.J. Watt, the quarterback for the Texans, kneels for the national anthem.
J.J. Watt he's not the quarterback. He's a lineman.
Yeah. Good football player. He's the only football player that I know off the Texans, right? He is a star player with thousands and thousands, if not millions of fans across this country. Yeah. He kneels for the national anthem out of respect to God because he doesn't put the flag or his country above God. And so that's his reasoning for kneeling. Now, have you ever heard anyone criticize J.J. Watt for doing that?
No.
Have you ever heard him saying he's disrespecting our troops, he's disrespecting our veterans, he's disrespecting the military for kneeling for God? No. So to me, the only difference between the two, because the action is the same, right? The difference is that one's a black man who's standing up for black people in America, and the other one's a white guy who's praising God in America. So to me, the difference in reaction is explainable by those differences, right? Now, you could say, oh, it's because, J.J. Watt's not saying anything about the military, but no, he actually is. He's saying that God is above the military and our country and our flag. Like he's in many ways, doing something that's even more just. He's directly putting down those symbols below something that he believes in. But the thing is that the people that criticize Colin Kaepernick believe what J.J. Watt believes, and they think that kneeling for God is good, but kneeling for black people is bad. Like I know that's an oversimplification, and that the people that criticize or didn't criticize would never state it that explicitly. But to me, that's the only explanation that is reasonable.
Well, no, it's okay, but
can you come
Eric,
up with a more reasonable one?
Yeah, because more people are Christian. More people in America are Christian and would side with J.J. Watt than Black Lives Matter activists. That's also another reason.
Yeah.
And again, about your point with the majority.
But what is
you
the difference
to just accept
there?
that.
Is it that what Colin Kaepernick is doing is explicitly disrespecting the military, and that what J.J. Watt is doing isn't disrespecting the military? Or is it because of the underlying statements of why they're protesting? Because that's kind of what you just said. But I want you to say it explicitly. It's because of why. Like, they're canceled not because they're protesting, because one of them didn't and one of them did. They're getting canceled because of what they're saying.
Yeah,
and
so
why
to a point that you made a little bit earlier, when the majority makes a decision, you have to follow it. And so it's not even up to whether or not it's just or not.
Yeah, exactly. But
what you're trying to say is that it was unjust that Colin Kaepernick...
That's my perspective.
Exactly.
That's my perspective.
But fair enough. But I think what you're going to get at is...
The point that I was more generally trying to draw is that people on the right generally see... And every time I say that, I'm generalizing. And I just want to acknowledge that it... And therefore, everything I've said is untrue because it's ignoring.
If we
nuance,
didn't
right?
generalize, this podcast would be like 10 hours long because we'd have to
ridiculous.
explain all the specifics.
Yeah, but because they chose to cancel Colin Kaepernick and not cancel J.J. Watt for doing exactly the same thing. Can we agree on that? They did exactly the same thing. But
with different intentions.
Different intentions and different speech.
Similar act.
So exact same action. The only difference was what came out of their mouths. So when I see people canceling Colin Kaepernick and not canceling J.J. Watt, they're doing so because of what is coming out of their mouths. So when they're talking about defending the military, and they're not defending the military against J.J. Watt's protests, it's not genuine, and it's creating an argument that they know will fly with a lot of supporters, but is really concealing the underlying argument of we don't want that being said.
Yeah, and I can say very similar things have happened to other people as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And again, to your point about the majority, like, yeah, if you're going to allow this cancel culture, you have to allow injustice by the majority. And you say it was an injustice for Colin Kaepernick to be canceled.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably was. But it doesn't matter either way.
Yeah, because I'm just an individual, and
Exactly.
my
And the
voice is
majority
just
makes the decision.
One voice in 345 million.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty good place to wrap it up.
Yeah, I'm so sweaty.
I'm so sweaty, I'm so hot, and I'm hungry. All right, this has been a 3.5 hour pod. We came back.
We came back hard. We had lots of stuff to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't reference one fact or
No.
one article the entire time. Which
Which is the best type of podcast.
the best on the podcast. We're just making everything up.
We could just make everything up. Well,
we're just-
we weren't necessary. I mean, we referenced a few things.
Yeah, I mean, like articles that I saw on Reddit and didn't read and just kept
yeah,
scrolling.
yeah.
you
That
know?
city in Washington.
Yeah,
that
exactly, exactly.
But anyways, this has been the Outlet Podcast.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed this
Thanks for
episode,
listening.
please give us a like and subscribe. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for listening.
Be a part of the conversation. Let us know what you think in the comments. Once again, like and subscribe.
Yeah,
you
and
for listening.
yeah, again, please join the discussion. Like,
Yeah.
it's just we're just two dudes in a
We're just
garage,
two
and
dudes, yeah.
the discussion doesn't end here. This is we're part of a larger discussion with the whole. I don't know, 100 people will reach with this podcast.
Exactly.
All right, thank you all for listening.
Yeah. Have a good day.